The mayor has called the meeting to order. Vice Mayor Kaplan.
Here.
Councilmember De La Cruz.
Here.
Councilmember Gross.
Here.
Mayor Lindsay.
Here.
Councilmember McCormick.
Here.
Councilmember Moss.
Here.
Councilmember Petros.
Here.
We do have a quorum, Mayor. If we may please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If everyone can remain standing, a moment of silence, honoring the victims in Las Vegas, and also a loss that we've all suffered here in the village. Councilmember Mort Freed passed away yesterday, and he is in our thoughts and prayers. Thank you.
Next item, Madam Mayor, is brief comments by council.
Council members?
I wanted to mention that one of our residents, Debbie Wanenkoff, is doing a speech on the dangers of distracted driving at our community center Thursday at 7. Her son was actually a victim of a driver that was texting, and he died, I believe, in Oklahoma when he was doing a charity ride across the country. So this is near and dear to her heart. She's working hard to try to change the legislature in this state to make it illegal, to make it a first offense to text and drive. So anybody that is interested in getting one of these flyers, I'll leave it up here, and please see if you can find time to come and listen to her speech.
Yes.
I wanted to point out and recognize that one of the most important things that I saw when we came back after Irma, was I was amazed that all of our water that had flooded the island, whatever height that was, had left, and our streets were basically dry. That's a magnificent, tribute to our efforts at drainage, and I think that was one of the things that was not pointed out in any newspaper article that I saw, and one of the things that we should be most proud of, as Key Biscayners, that situation happened, because there could be a storm surge, we could have flooding from rain and such, but the important thing is that we get the water out as quickly as possible, and I think that's something that we need to point out and make sure that everybody knows. I personally am looking into some opportunities. I'm working with our development services director of development services, and a couple of other people in looking at ways to possibly help with the flooding of our low-lying homes. I happen to live in a home that's not, BFE, so we'll keep you abreast of all that kind of stuff.
Thank you. Yes, Frank.
Let's try to support this texting while driving thing if it's possible to do so. It's important. Secondly, thinking of Mort, I don't know if you all hesitate to make a mawkish moment, but if you saw the video excerpts that Jennifer sent around about the Zork hearings in 2010, you saw there was Mort, as he had been perched, ready to speak for many years. There was Bonnie Cooper, Jim Tainer, and Basha Hicks. And it causes me to think that we should really appreciate each other. We are, we don't know what the schedule is. But watching those videos made me think of what a tremendous community we've had all these years, so many people making important contributions that I reflected on when I was watching this.
Thank you, Frank.
Next item, Madam Mayor, is public comments.
And I will start with Robert Bizzle.
Good evening, Council. My name is Robert Dusoglu. I live at 785 Glenridge Road. I'm here on behalf of the Advocacy Committee for the Key Biscayne Chamber of Commerce. I understand that tonight you'll be addressing and having a discussion regarding the monument signs. And we are requesting on behalf of the Chamber that this be discussed thoroughly and that you give us the opportunity to understand what you're proposing and what will be going on in the future. We do have some guests coming to our next meeting, which will be next Wednesday, to speak on behalf of the signs, but we'd like to understand better what you're proposing, and we request that you consider it very, very carefully before moving forward.
Absolutely, we want to understand it too.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mario Garcia Serra.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Mario Garcia Serra with offices at 600 Brickell Avenue and residence at 600 Grape Tree Drive, representing 240 Crandon Investments, LLC, the owner of the 240 Crandon office building. Here to also talk about monument signs. Surprised how much interest monument signs has generated. Our interest, of course, in having a monument sign at the 240 Crandon property is in part what has motivated the discussion on monument signs, and I think it's just good for us to sort of give you a vantage point of how we see things progressing at this stage of the process. At present, the code prohibits any new monument signs and also requires the removal of existing monument signs. And that means that all monument signs, whether they be for commercial, institutional, or multifamily residential uses, are supposed to be removed pursuant to the code as it exists today. We have always thought that permitting any new monument signs when so many have been allowed to continue in existence was not fair or appropriate. Similarly, requiring that all those signs that exist today be removed also strikes us as unfair, given the need for these signs for directional and exposure purposes, especially considering the case of 240 Crandon, the fact that we have now a Baptist Express Care facility there. During the last council meeting where this was discussed in late August, there was considerable interest on the part of the council to find out why this prohibition was enacted to begin with. Both Vice Mayor Kaplan and I happen to have served on the ZORC, that was the committee that made a slew of recommendations for amendments to the zoning code in 2010, one of which ended up being this adoption of a prohibition on any more monument signs within the village. Vice Mayor and I got together to share our collective memories and see if we could remember any additional details of it. And I would think that the most relevant sort of fact that came from that meeting was our review of a video clip of a March 2010 Village Council workshop on the ZORC. At that time, the council, I believe none of you were on the council at that point in time. It was a different group of council members. But the conclusion of that discussion, after a presentation by Bonnie Cooper on behalf of the chamber and considerable discussion among the council, was indeed for there to be some sort of workshop type of process, I think, and communication between the chamber and village staff to see if there was some sort of compromise short of a prohibition which would permit monument signs for commercial properties along Crandon. It seems from that point in time that that was just not taken forward and did not happen, and we sort of now inadvertently are picking up where we left off back in March of 2010, trying to figure out what to do and what's a fair thing to do with monument signs. Based on the review of other local codes, your village staff has come up with a proposal for certain parameters, which I think is a good starting point. I've also proposed some language myself, which I'll distribute to you so you can review during the course of the meeting or during the discussion item, which I think is similar in many ways to what the village staff has proposed, but different in certain key points, in particular in key points which address a lot of the concerns which have been raised, in particular by the former planning and zoning director, who I know sent you an email communication with certain suggestions last night. In particular, the height that I was proposing in the code amendment that I proposed is 4 feet as opposed to the 6 feet the village staff is proposing. Location requirements are a little bit tighter in that it's requiring a location along Crandon Boulevard with a lot width of 100 feet, so as to eliminate the possibility of monument signs on Mashta or along Harbor Drive. And the idea of building compatibility is in there also, so that the sign is equivalent to the design and architecture of the building of which it's accessory to. And lastly, also prohibits any illumination as is presently prohibited for any sign within the village, which only permits backlighting. So with that said, I'll pass out that suggested code amendment. We can discuss further. I've got a bunch of boards that I could show you if you want to during the discussion period. But I think the more we talk about this and the more we investigate, the more we realize that there are justifications and grounds for taking another look at the monument sign prohibition and trying to come up with something that works well, both for the business community and the village as a whole, aesthetic-wise and functionally.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Clifford Brody.
Thank you, Council. My name is Clifford Brody, 613 Ocean Drive, Suite 2C, Key Biscayne. I'm speaking on behalf of my employer, 240 Crandon Boulevard, about the monument signs. It's been seven years.
Excuse me, Mr. Brody, are you registered?
I'm not registered as a lobbyist. I'm only speaking on behalf of my employer. I don't think I need to.
Chad? I don't know what.
Yeah, underneath our lobbying code, you'd still need to register. Even if you're speaking, if you're the principal, you would still need to register. So,
okay.
I mean, I don't know if we have a form here or anything like that, or we can have one and have Mr.
Sure.
Brody just registered and have it filled out, and then, you know, you can have him speak or.
Sure.
Madam Mayor, I will register as a lobbyist at the first opportunity if I can speak. Not, I'll sit down.
I'm just trying to follow the rules.
Well, what are the rules?
How about if you
That-
just speak for yourself? Can you do
can.
that and say what you wanted to say?
Gary, our attorney gave us a legal opinion.
We have his memo.
We have the form.
We have the memo.
Excuse me?
We have Cliff's memo.
Okay.
We do.
Thank
have
you,
a
Mayor.
memo. Thank you. Our next speaker is Louisa Conway.
Good evening, Council. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm speaking on behalf of Emerald Bay. I am a board of director for Emerald Bay, the Key Colony HOA, as well as the President's Council of Condos. I'm a director on that. I'm up here to just ask the council to reconsider disbursement of the $4.2 million Village Hurricane Emergency Fund towards the condos, given that we've already contributed about 52% of that fund. And so I feel that on behalf of most of the condos right now in the village, we've been taking care of our own debris, removing it, not placing it on Crandon or anything. So we have incurred our own expenses in doing that. And I think that it's a matter of fairness, given that we're also part of this community, that some consideration be given to reimbursing our community, even though it is a gated community. So I just hope that the council will think about that and think about the other half of our village. So that's it. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
One
Thank you.
village.
One village.
One village, okay.
Okay, our next speaker is Michelle Estevez.
Thank you, Mayor, Council Member. 798, Michelle Estevez, 798 Crandon Boulevard. I'm also here representing some of my communities. Grand Bay Villas and Estate, it is a gated community, and we have to remove our own debris. And since I am the one that at the last council meeting brought to your consideration to consider if you're going to supplement the removal of the debris and the Key Biscayne to include the gated communities, because was an additional funding that will come from taxpayer monies, and I think that the gated communities, they are also contribute. So I believe that it's fair that as one village, we are included. We should be included, as the supplement will come from all taxpayer money. And also here, speaking on behalf of the Square Shopping Center, for the monument sign. We are a shopping center that we do have a monument sign. And we like to be part of it and reconsider in a way that also benefit the whole business community, because we are also, as a taxpayer, the business community contribute a lot to the village. And last but not least, I'm proud to know that this council will recognize Dr. Ravelo this evening. I'm very proud, and I thank you for. I think that that is a very good from the Village Council to recognize our members of the community that they serve, and they have a recognition and some very well recognized organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Matt Bramson.
Hello, I'm Matt Bramson. I'm the president of Key Colony Homeowners Association and vice president of Key Colony 4. I'm not going to repeat what Michelle and Luisa said. I'm just going to add some specifics about our community and some context. Specifics are Key Colony is going to spend between $100,000 and $150,000 to clean up our fallen trees and other landscaping damage. And Key Colony 4 is going to spend between $75,000 and $100,000 on their landscaping and interior courtyard damage and such. So that's just some numbers to keep in mind. Context would be there are a number of large expenses that the village has either taken on or is going to take on that have upfront and ongoing costs, including stormwater system, underground power lines, and of course storm-related cleanup. Those are all obligations that our association takes on for all of our 1,179 homeowners and taxpayers. We have our own stormwater system that we installed and maintained at our cost. We have our own underground power lines that we installed and maintained at our cost. And we have our own landscaping that we maintain at our own cost. And so when there's an opportunity to see those costs shared more fairly, given our tax contribution, we would appreciate that. That's really all I have to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Our next speaker is Antonio Camejo.
Good evening, council members. I'm Antonio Camejo, 151 Crandon Boulevard. I'm here representing the Condominium President's Council, made up of 35 condominium associations. I want to address a couple of issues. One is FEMA. I've been doing a little bit of background research, and the development of FEMA is very interesting in terms of how they have evolved their view on gated communities. When FEMA was formed in 78 under the Carter administration, condominiums were just barely beginning to emerge around the country. And FEMA, in this last crisis, has shown clearly that they are very open to looking at the issue of gated communities and going onto private roads. And I believe a presentation tonight, some research has been done by Council Member Brett Moss, and I want to thank him for his work in looking into this for all of us. But what I want to say is that whether or not we dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's in doing our FEMA application in good faith to make sure that we were compensated for emergency hurricane expenses is an issue that we're going to have to look at with FEMA and try to work out. But it's clear that FEMA is open to this issue, and I think we have to be very proactive both on the legal side and politically with FEMA to make sure that they recognize the importance of condominium and gated condominiums on Key Biscayne, that we represent 63% of the registered voters and 52% of the tax base, and therefore it's a very important part of the community and cannot be ignored. The issue of the Hurricane Emergency Fund, I think, is very clear. It's a question of fairness in terms of how those funds are dispersed. They must be done on an equitable basis, and the council cannot discriminate against one class of taxpayers over another just simply because they happen to have private roads connecting their community. Last time I addressed the issue of when you have emergency and safety, that there are no issues with fire rescue and police going on private roads to provide assistance to residents in a gated community, and that's proper. This is an emergency. This is a health and safety issue that we were facing. In Key Colony, we had roads completely blocked. If there was a medical emergency, it would be impossible for an ambulance to get to a resident, and therefore we had to take immediate action ourselves in order to clear those roads to provide for the safety of our residents. And that's grounds for providing compensation. Whatever we are able to work out with FEMA, and we hope that we are successful with that, that is not the final word. The final word is, I'm sorry.
It's coming up very closely.
Yeah,
and we will have a workshop on this so you can have more of a final word, okay?
Okay. Just let me just close. So what I think is very important is that the council not view this as a future project in terms of compensation, but as a current project that we need to address. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Martin Pinilla.
Good evening, Mayor Lindsay and council members. I'm Martin Pinilla, 1121 Crandon Boulevard. I'm the president of the Towers of Key Biscayne Condo Association, and I'm also a member of the Key Biscayne Presidents Club. And I'm here with the same subject that Mr. Camejo had addressed and some of the others prior to me. We are a community of 538 homes, all of which are avid and cheerful residents of the village of Key Biscayne. We had spent quite a bit of our own money cleaning up the debris in the aftermath of Irma in the neighborhood of $80,000. And I join my words to theirs for the village council to consider reimbursing the money that we have spent. And I know that it will be very well remembered by all of our residents, many of which are voters in the next election too. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Our next and final speaker is Mike Davey.
Thought you could sneak the meeting in without me finding out, didn't you? Mike Davey, 50 Ocean Lane Drive. I, too, am a resident of a condominium, but I'm not yet a gated community. We may have a gate Wednesday night. We're voting on it. But anyway, to Lucho's point, we're one village. And I do think that we should be looking at pickup prospectively. I disagree. I think it's going to be very difficult for this village to try and compensate the condominiums for what's gone on in the past. I think we have to look forward. Something's changing. We want to make a change. That's fine, but let's go forward. But I would like the council to consider this going forward, that we all work together, we have the workshop, and we figure out a good plan for what's in the future. The legislative, the resolution you're passing, I would like to see the school issues brought forward and put on that resolution. We need to be in support of our schools. The budget's going down, and we need to be the strong proponents for our public schools. They are one of the features of this community that keeps us strong financially, so let's do what we can on that point. Texting and driving, I just wanted to bring up that Debbie Wanikoff, who lost her son Patrick, I think it's 2 years ago now. I think you were going to hand some things out. I think, she's giving us a talk next Thursday. I would really appreciate it if we could get the word out to the community. It's an important issue. I know it's on your legislative agenda or legislative, I don't know what you're calling this resolution, priorities, thank you. But this is a big one. I keep seeing people, I keep seeing kids now in golf carts riding around, not paying attention. We need to do something in this town. We need to be stronger on that because one life lost is one too many. At the monument signs, I caution all the points I liked. The third point was one I'm curious to know how you all want to have the architecture, how it's aesthetically similar to the building that it's attached to. So I'm curious to know what mechanism is going to make, who's going to make that determination. I know there was talk a long time ago of having some sort of architectural board. I'm against that. So if that's the thing that you're considering, I would suggest otherwise. But I like the plan. I like what else you've done there. Again, on the condo issue, let's work together. We are one village. It was an issue. As a resident of a non-gated community right now, we don't have a lot of options. We had to drag stuff up. You know, Michelle had to take care of our place for us, and we have a lot of residents who could use this resource. And I know the village was kind enough to collect on those streets, but it was sort of they were doing it for us. It wasn't something we were supposed to be doing. People were not supposed to be taking their waste out onto the street. We'd appreciate if we could work out a program in the future. So thanks very much. Have a great night.
Thank you. Next.
All right, before we go on, can I ask a question? Because I'm not clear what the rule is. Other than Mike Davey, who came to talk for himself, everybody else here was representing a body of some sort. And Cliff came and he wanted to say something about a body that he happens to work for, and he was not allowed to speak. So I'd like for our council to tell us what the difference is with respect to all the different people.
Well, I don't know what everybody's relationships are. I mean, all I know is that Mr. Brody stood up and said he's here on behalf of his employer to discuss about the monument signs. Now, it's not, first of all, we're not the ethics police, it's Dade County. He, you know, if he wants to stand up and believes he's not a lobbyist, you know, he can speak, but I mean, it's at his own risk. But underneath the county code, principals are required to register, okay? I don't know, I mean, I don't believe that Mr. Brody's a principal, but I don't know all of the factual circumstances.
Yeah, so I think everybody needs to register going forward.
If individuals are speaking in their own capacity, they don't have to register. If they're not, you know, that's not a requirement.
But if they're speaking as a member of an organization, like I am a member of this condo board, I'm speaking on the behalf of the board.
It really depends. It depends on the factual circumstances. I mean, it's very hard to articulate each one. If it's just someone speaking that, oh, I live in this condominium and I want to speak, like, you don't have to register as a lobbyist.
But that's not what was going on here. So, I mean.
But again, I don't know all of their.
I'm very happy that everybody came to speak to us. So. I'm extremely happy, and I love this part of our show. You know, but I also don't like it when somebody gets, you know, sat down, and you know, and that was not right. You know,
if
folks, this has been what is
again,
has in terms of employee. And, you know,
I think
employment.
Just for a moment, I think we have a form that he can fill out, and that will resolve it.
It needs to be notarized.
Yeah, I mean, if he wants to do it, I mean, we're not going to shut him down, but I mean, it's at his risk. I mean.
He's here on behalf of his employer, and I think that's what historic.
Well, I don't want to. If Mr. Brody wants to,
so was everybody else here. I'm not sure what the difference is between Cliff and his employer, and Tony and his group, and you know, Mr. Bonilla and his group, and Michelle and her group. What's the difference? I don't know. I don't see a difference.
Could I request, please, that you, at maybe the next meeting, give us a much more clear set of guidelines as to someone that does have to register and someone that doesn't, because right after this thing happened to Cliff, I talked to you and I talked to our clerk, and I don't want to repeat anything, but to me, a president of a condo association or a manager of a shopping center certainly has the same type of vested relationship as an employer of someone else. We just need some clarification.
I'll read you the exclusion. So a person who appears as a representative of a neighborhood association without compensation or reimbursement for the appearance, whether direct or indirect, contingent to express support or opposition of an item, is excluded. Okay?
Not being paid. So they're good.
Okay. Now, I don't know Mr. Brody's relationship with his employer. Okay. So it's a little bit unfair for me to, you know, it's really his burden to come forward. But one other person that is excluded is employees of a principal whose normal scope of employment does not include lobbying activities is excluded. Now, I don't know all of these factual determinations. It's not my role or our role. It's really on they have the burden to come forward and state it. So maybe I don't know what his relationship was with his
But
employer.
Chad, I didn't say that to put you on the spot or in any way to be critical. I'm saying that we as a body need some clarification on this issue, because every single meeting we have numerous people get up and speak on certain issues. Some of them are lawyers representing clients. Some of them are employees representing employers. Some of them are officers in an association or managers. And I don't know the difference. I don't think that everyone up here feels comfortable that they know the difference either. And I think it's something we all ought to really understand. So just asking you if you'll clarify it for us.
And Chad, if you could also, for our benefit and for our clerk's benefit, because I know that different municipalities, they handle it in a more clear and direct way, and so people are very sure of what their responsibilities are.
Yeah, in our case, we don't have lobbying regulations per the village code. We just rely upon the county code.
Did I understand you correctly, though? If he is not getting compensated for his appearance here, and if his employer is not a lobbyist, then it's up to him to make that decision and come forward?
If he's not normally a lobbyist.
No, if an employee of a principal whose normal scope of employment does not include lobbying activities, he's not a lobbyist. Again, I don't know the relationship.
But I'm just saying, if he, in his mind, can check both of those boxes, he could come forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I said it's really on the burden of the person speaking. So, now, to the mayor's point, I don't know if the clerk has it, but a lot of communities keep a file on who's registered and distributes that, or even has it here for the benefit of the council when somebody comes up to speak, to see who has registered.
And send out periodic emails to people who may, have an interest in.
Right. And sometimes
it's a best practice.
Sometimes the lobbying registration is sent out. But if Mr. Brody wants to speak on his behalf, as a resident, he can too. So.
Next item, please.
Approval, deferrals, additions, deletions, substitutions, withdrawals.
I have an addition, C of special presentations, introduction of hurricane response team enhancement in the area of logistics and finance. And we have Mr. Bob Anderson, Mr. Don Murphy, and Mr. Jeff Campbell. It's an introduction on behalf of the manager of our supplemental team. Any other additions, deletions?
I'll move your addition.
Thank you.
Second, please.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next item under special presentations is a presentation by Colleen Castile on proposed beach plan.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and council members and village manager and everyone else. I'm Colleen Castile, and I reside at 3209 Adwood Drive, Tallahassee, Florida, 32312, sorry. And I'm here to present the joint presentation with my colleague, with my colleague Tim Blankenship from Moffitt and Nickel, I always say the S. And we've been going over this report and trying to get with you, and we were kind of delayed by the hurricane. So what we're presenting here will be a little bit of update from the hurricane, but the state has also delayed some of its deadlines as well, and you'll see that through the presentation. In an effort to keep on a timely basis, you've given us 20 minutes for this. We've got 10 slides, really 9 slides with content, and if you don't mind, I'd like to go through the slides really quickly. If you'll make notes on the questions, I think you'll find that through the process here, we may answer a lot of your questions, but then Tim and I will be here to answer whether it's political or engineering. This is our plan update. What you see in front of you is some photographs that Tim took when he did the review after Hurricane Irma, and I think it was about a week after that. So you can see, Tim, I don't know if you want to make any
Sure. Just a general assessment. Tim Blankenship, Moffitt & Nichol, the engineer for the Key Biscayne. We've done beach assessments with village staff, with Public Works, and we've also done beach assessments with FEMA. What you see here, most of you have been to the beach after the storm. It's very flat after all that wave activity. You had about 3 to 3.5 feet of storm surge, and a lot of the dunes were wiped out. So most of the damage to the beach has been to the dunes. The project that was done in 2017, just a few months ago, essentially did its job and helped protect the beach and the upland properties, but the beach does need to be restored.
Thank you.
That date should be 2017 then, on your slide.
Oh, yes. So we're going to present 3 scenarios. I think I missed it. We're going to present 3 scenarios to you tonight. We're going to talk to you about the reimbursement for the 2017 truck haul beach nourishment, the long haul beach management plan that we're recommending, as well as more information on seeking the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Federal Section 103 project designation. Number A is the project was complete in April and performed as it was designed to be performed, as you saw the loss of the sand, with a minimal level of damage to the structures around it or behind it. And we're in the process of finalizing and filling in the gaps for the long-term not the feasibility study, the reimbursement, the FEMA reimbursement, as well as for the state 50-50 split on the reimbursement from the 2017 truck haul project. On that issue, we have a 50-50 split with the state. So our ideal would be to get $1 million back from your a little over $2 million project. The rankings are in process right now. The way that process works is that the state actually goes through and gives us several points and then gives us the opportunity to clarify issues so that we can get additional points. We will talk about one of those, which is some public access a little bit later. The ranking is needed to determine funding allocations throughout the state. We are, in comparison to a lot of other projects, we know that each year there's typically allocated about $30 million for beach renourishment statewide for the state level of funding. That is woefully inadequate to what the state requests are. In some cases, in some cases it's about $90 million, and so this small project that we have. We don't know where it falls, but last year there was an additional appropriation of $50 million for projects, as well as another $13 million for emergency appropriations. So with those funding mechanisms or those funding items, we think that we may be able to get a little further up in the rankings. This past year, in the 2017-18 annual appropriations, you did qualify for $55,000 for monitoring. Was that, Tim? And so we'll work with you to make sure that you get those funds into the village's coffers. The unknown is whether these disaster-related requests are going to move up above some of the typical rankings. So that's an unknown to us right now. And the state's deadline for getting information back from all of the applicants is this Friday. They'll take probably about a week to evaluate it, calculate it, and then come out with a statewide list.
Yeah, before you go to the next one, can you go back to that? When you say performed as designed to protect structures, what are the structures?
Well, specifically, council member, the beach project that was just completed back in April did provide an added level of shore protection as compared to what you had prior to the project. So the main purpose of the beach, it's actually not recreational, it's actually for shore protection. So all of the upland properties, the seawalls, the foundations, we performed an assessment. I'm not sure if the building department has performed an assessment, but we did not see any damage to any footings or foundations or any critical components of upland structures here in the village. I mean, quite frankly, the east coast of Florida was very fortunate as compared to some other impacts in the Caribbean from larger storms.
As a sideline discussion, the FEMA funding, Moffitt Nickel conducted the post-storm assessment and working with FEMA to agree on the calculations. Do you want to mention what your email you got today? Actually, just right before the meeting, we got a notice from FEMA. We, again, as I mentioned earlier, were out in the field with the Public Works Department here in the village and with FEMA performing actually with the Corps of Engineers that was assigned by FEMA to prepare what are called the PDA, which is a preliminary damage assessment. Based on the Corps of Engineers' initial erosion assessment, they've estimated about 22,000 cubic yards of erosion as part of the, so I literally just got the email from them here before the meeting, so we'll be responding to them. We will be recommending a post-storm survey to be performed by the village as well to get a more accurate estimate of the erosion losses, not only from the beach, but also from the dune areas.
Was the April project 35,000 yards?
It was around 34,000. Yeah.
If FEMA does approve that, there'll be additional monies to allocated to the village.
As far as we understand, the county has not been officially declared a disaster area. I mean, the president declared it an emergency area, but there needs to be a formal declaration, and I'm not sure of the timing on that. Maybe somebody else in the village has an update on that.
I just want to interject that I was contacted by Mayor Jimenez, and I think they were trying to get some designation. They wanted our data, our empirical evidence as to our shoreline and how it had been impacted, the beach erosion, and also the impacts to the dune system. So it's something that they're expecting from us, and it would only help to bolster all of Miami-Dade.
So that's a request from the county. Should we contact Durham regarding that, or the mayor's office?
I would think the mayor's office.
Okay.
But he called me the day after the hurricane, and I have to tell you, so did Commissioner Suarez, who is working with Senator Marco Rubio.
Okay.
Okay, we'll make sure that we do that, and we'll follow through with an email to you.
Did the governor declare a disaster?
The governor declared a disaster for the state. He has to also wait on the damage assessments from each of the counties to determine whether each of the counties meet that eligibility.
If the governor declares a disaster, does that constitute a disaster for federal purposes?
Not to my knowledge, no. Like, for example, Broward County was declared a disaster area by the feds for Hurricane Matthew, but Miami-Dade was not. Miami-Dade actually appealed that designation, and as to my knowledge, the appeal was not approved. So we're actually we have some clients in Broward that we're working with on FEMA reimbursement for the engineered beach. So as long as because in Miami-Dade County, the only stretch of beach that is a non-federal section of beach is actually Key Biscayne. The rest, all of Miami Beach, Sunny Isles, Bal Harbor, all of those other communities are all within the Federal Shore Protection Project, which comes under another. FEMA does not reimburse federal shore protection projects.
It's not, for now, placeholder. It's one thing if a county declares a disaster or an emergency where the state declares for the entire state a disaster. My question is whether that counts differently than a county by county determination.
Right.
So it's not for now. We don't have to discuss it, but that's the question.
Okay. we'll get clarification on that. My experience has been that the governor declares it for the whole state, or not the whole state, because Western Panhandle didn't get impacted. And then the acceptance of that disaster declaration has to do with how much your losses are. And so, so that's the importance of trying to get that information over to the county.
Thank you.
By the way, it's not the fact that losses occurred, it's the dollar amount of the losses?
Yes, the dollar amount of the losses.
Could I respectfully request of my colleagues to let them finish their presentation because they are on the clock and they really do need to get through this.
Okay, we'll keep moving. The 2008 and 2012 nourishment projects were funded by FEMA dollars from impacts to the previous hurricanes. So the long-term management strategy for the state level, there are 4 phases to that. The feasibility study, the design, the construction, and then the monitoring. What we are in the process of doing is finalizing the feasibility study. Moffitt Nickel will finish that by December 1st, I think we have. And so what we've got to do is to work on some of the elements of ranking to improve the ranking. And one of the couple of the biggest things are public access to the beaches. And so we would like to come to you with some suggestions for improving public access to the beaches. I understand that you have this great Lime bicycle project here, which a lot of folks are using bicycles and trolleys to increase public access to their beaches. DEP is kind of looking outside the box for different types of public access projects. And so I know you only have, what are there, 2 access points?
Right now, there's only the 2 access points at the Oceana, which are the easements, because the ocean, the beach park is for residents only, so you can't use that in the rankings, even though that would be considered what's called a major access, because there's restrooms there's some limited parking. The areas, the easements you have now, I think there's some golf cart parking and maybe some bike racks. So those count as what they call minor accesses. The major accesses give you a lot more points in the ranking.
What about the hotel?
The hotel counts in the ranking, yes.
And what about the extended stay hotel?
Only the hotels that are on the beach that have access. So for example, the only hotels that count for in the ranking would be the Silver Sands and the Ritz.
The one extended stay, the Coral Reef on Galen, has access down the Galen access with a key fob. There's a between the Ritz and the Sands, there's a access, or the Beach Club maybe it is, there's a access path there for residents of Galen, and that Coral Reef short-term, long, whatever it is, has access through that.
We would have to review, as part of the application package, you submit the documentation of their license from the, what is it, DBPOR?
DBPR.
DP, yeah, whatever she said. Anyway, that organization, or, it's a state, we'd have to understand what their license is. So I think it has to be, almost be like a full-time hotel type situation. Are they
It's
weekly?
not permanent residents.
Are they weekly or monthly residents, or do we know? Or
Yes, it's both. And same with Key Colony Botanica.
Okay.
We've had this conversation before.
Okay.
And I know we've had this conversation, but where did we come out with the access using Billbags or Crandon with the parking and the fact that it's one continuous beach of walking?
They do count a certain amount of the shoreline with both parks, both Billbags and Crandon. So yes, that is in the calculation. However, the extended stay and Botanica are not.
Okay.
We would have to look at their DPPOR licensing, and we've worked with other communities to change the licensing. I mean, it'd be interesting to see how many condos are out on Airbnb and things like that to see really how many visitors you're getting in there. But right now the state only accepts officially that are licensed as operating hotels.
Well, and we are licensing our Airbnb in the village, and I think that
yes,
the development department could help with some of those numbers. It's going to take me a long time.
All of us.
Okay.
We will work with the staff to figure out exactly what that has, and we'll work with the community, with those hotels and bed and breakfast, whatever else they are, to maximize those points.
Thank you.
Okay. The other item that increases the ranking is having cost sharing with other communities. And so at one point we had a Miami-Dade County sharing process, and I think that that's something that we should consider doing again. But I know that there's been some discussion. I think relations are improving with Miami-Dade County, and and so perhaps this is an opportunity to talk with them, and also to talk with the Florida Inland Navigation District on those issues, to try to get them as partners with us.
Yes.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and then the third option is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Section 103 project is we determined it was a 65% cost share issue to be aware of. And the other issue of seagrasses and their impacts is something that we've got to talk about. And we'll talk about that a little bit further on another slide. But what Tim has done is he's also in the feasibility study included some breakwaters, and we'll have to look at what the actual impacts to those are to the seagrasses. And you want to talk a little bit about that slide?
This is from our draft feasibility report. This is a sketch of some of the breakwaters and some of the meetings that we've had in the past here at the village. The village doesn't desire this armored type beach like you might see in some other areas of Florida. So what we're looking at is the feasibility of submerged breakwaters that you would only really see the top of them at low tide. But long term, we've discussed how the continued truck haul beach maintenance is just not sustainable. Sunny Isles, through the Corps of Engineers, has a project that just bid, and the unit prices are even higher than what the village paid for in the 2017 project. They're up over around $61 a cubic yard, and it's just going to continue to get more and more expensive. The breakwater option would stabilize the beaches and make the beach last longer and protect from storms. So this is an option we're looking at in terms of cost and permitting as part of the feasibility study. But in the slide here, you can kind of see what that cross-section is. Essentially a trapezoidal cross-section constructed of limestone boulders with a foundation. And again, as Colleen mentioned, there would be additional seagrass impacts because that area is prime with seagrass that would have to be mitigated or addressed somehow. But overall, historically, the agencies were not supportive of hard structures, but with really the Tri-County area, Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade counties not having economical sources of offshore sand, they are looking at longer-term solutions such as structures, because they realized that these beach nourishment projects, Broward County just spent $55 million on their Fort Lauderdale beach nourishment, and a lot of that was lost here just as the hurricanes passed through. So these projects are not sustainable. So the structural solutions need to be evaluated further.
And so that brings us to, so on this feasibility for this project, you have, I know you haven't calculated costs yet, but do you have a range of costs that you're looking at? And does that include or not include the breakwaters?
You know, the range of the costs for the larger project with the breakwaters and the beach nourishment is going to be between $12 to $15 million. There is an allowance for mitigation in that. We've talked about the 1987 project that was constructed by the Corps of Engineers that impacted an extensive amount of seagrass. Your attorneys have provided a memo to the council on that Section 120 ruling back in the 80s. So we will be looking to that as possible way to minimize the amount of mitigation, because the area was previously mitigated or was previously impacted and previously mitigated. So we would be looking at that to try to minimize the costs of any mitigation for nearshore seagrass impacts.
And you've seen a tremendous amount of natural recruitment for the seagrasses, despite having these projects. So the third option is this Seeking the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Section 103 project. It has a $10 million maximum budget limitation for the damage reduction projects in partnership with non-government agencies, non-federal government agencies. The project designation is a long-term play. So this is you essentially seek a letter of intent asking the Army Corps of Engineers to do a project for you, because that's essentially what happens. They do all of the permitting, they do all of the feasibility studies, and they do all of the construction as well as the monitoring. And so given that, it takes a bit of time, because the way that it's funded on the federal government level is these projects are funded through something called the Water Resources Development Act bill. These bills only come about, it was supposed to be every 4 years, sometimes it goes out to 6 years, and the president did not allocate or recommend any funding for beach renourishment in his budget recommendation. It's likely to be different from the Senate and House point of view, because it typically is. But we just want to let you know where the administration's point of view is right now. The benefits of having this, the benefits of having it 103 designation project is that the Corps does participate with 65% of it, and then the state and the other agencies, if you include Miami-Dade County, but the state and the village would partner on the 35% of it. The downside are these studies, the permits, the authorization, and the appropriation could potentially take 10 years. Because even though it's authorized in the WRDA bill, it has to have money appropriated for it. So there have been, periods of time where money hasn't been allocated for anywhere from 2 to 6 years after the authorization has taken place. In addition to that, I'd recommend that if this is an avenue that you want to pursue, that I would recommend having a federal lobbyist to do that. But let's go ahead and take all of this information, have you ask your questions about each of the projects, and then we can have a discussion and we'll make a recommendation to you, if that will work for you.
Sure.
Okay.
Council members? Yes.
This $10 to $12 million Band-Aid, $10 to $12 million project that we're talking about. I think you referred to it, Tim, as our $2 million last project as a Band-Aid. So my question is, if we go that route on the major project and spend 6 times that amount of money, how long could we reasonably expect it to last? How much maintenance would be involved in maintaining it? Is it going to be better than 6 Band-Aids every year or two? Is it very sustainable at a reasonable cost?
Well, I think the key, council member, is the breakwaters that would actually dissipate the wave energy and further stabilize it and reduce the erosion rate. So you could expect a larger beach nourishment to last. Instead of your typical truck haul beach nourishments, the last predictions we looked at, they were lasting about every 2 to 4 years. And I've explained to the council in past meetings, there's several areas, for example, in front of Silver Sands and in front of Ocean Club, where because of the encroachment of the seagrass, you don't even have the minimum width for proper shore protection. You just can't put enough sand in there without impacting the seagrass and requiring mitigation. So we haven't done any detailed studies, but because of the breakwaters, you could expect the beach nourishment to last probably 3 times as long. Obviously, without storm impacts and other, but under normal conditions, the breakwaters would extend the. You could almost, if the breakwaters are designed right, you could almost stabilize the beach to become somewhat of a closed system.
But that's the problem with, in my mind, when you say normal has almost become hurricanes pretty much every year, whether they're hitting us or they're 50 miles offshore, but they're Cat 4s or whatever. I mean, we can expect that we're going to have a fairly high incidence. And will this major project be able to withstand that kind of storm damage and still be there?
That's something, again, we're looking at this at a feasibility level. Obviously, the concern you have is with storm surge. What I saw in this past hurricane was more damage to the dunes, which is the storm surge was higher from the storm than it was in Wilma. Not by much, but it was a little bit higher. Even though really, the maximum gust winds for this storm were recorded around just under 100 miles an hour. So it was really just barely a Cat 1, not even a Cat 2 storm when it came through Miami-Dade County. But if you wanted more storm protection, we'd have to raise the elevations of the breakwaters. And then when you're sitting on the beach, you'd be looking at these armored structures. So it would be a delicate, if you wanted more storm protection in the beach to resist the stronger hurricanes, you'd have to raise the elevations of the breakwater. So that would kind of be just a kind of a sensitivity analysis as to the level of protection that you want. But the breakwaters would certainly dissipate the wave energy and provide a longer-term solution than what you're doing now, which is what we call a soft solution, which is just continuing to place sand. Okay, you bring up an interesting point with the passing by storms. We're seeing that a lot when Jose went by, and even to some extent Maria when it went spinning around to the north. It was sending in very, very large, it was a perfectly sunny day, but those storms churning just offshore were sending in much, much larger swells and would cause extensive erosion to the north, Vero Beach, Canaveral, and those areas. And so, some of those communities, some of those beaches are concerned because their surveys were done immediately post Irma, but a lot of the erosion actually occurred from those storms further offshore.
Well, what I'd want to see, if it's possible, is some kind of a reasonable estimate of if we undertake this kind of a project with the breakwaters, what can it withstand before it's damaged to a point where we maybe have to do it all over again? Because if it takes up to 10 years to maybe get federal reimbursement, we'll be on our second or third beach renourishment before we get paid anything for the first one. So we really need to see, I think, how effective this will be and how much pounding it can take and still survive. And the second thing I would like you to do, and then I'll shut up and let anybody else talk, is that this is a lot of complicated stuff. And each one of these, whether we're applying for federal reimbursement or state reimbursement or FEMA or whatever, you're going to need to tell us what you recommend. They all have their pros and cons, as I see from your presentation, and as I've learned from talking to you all about this process. We're going to need a recommendation because you know more about this than we do, and hopefully you'll be able to get that to us.
Now, one thing that I'd like you all to discuss and clarify is one of the linchpin arguments that we've had for the last couple of years has been government cut and the erosion caused by the cut and the impacts of our inlet management. And I don't know that that's been addressed, but in terms of getting federal and state funds, it's been a very compelling argument and something that actually and we discussed this before, when the U.S. Army Corps came here for a meeting to discuss the new dredge of government cut, they recognized and they said that there had been findings as to the impacts and the erosion, and they were willing to work with us. And I don't know that that's been explored enough, but I think it needs to be.
I think you're right. As we spoke earlier, Tim and I thought that it would be a good thing to speak with there's a new Corps representative down here, Jackie Kaiser.
Right, Jackie Kaiser, Mayor, we had met with you after you went to the legislative days up in Tallahassee. And yeah, I believe there's another council member that went with you. And, I think some of the folks from the Florida DEP had recommended that Key Biscayne consider another federal project as an option is this 103 project. So we do recommend at least an initial consultation. I mean, there's no risk with the Corps of Engineers, understand how many of these Section 103 projects have been authorized in the last 10 years. I'm only aware of one in Southeast Florida, and that's the Virginia Key project that was authorized. They did some work on the groin field there probably like 10 years ago. And that was within an agreement with City of Miami. That's the only one that I'm aware of, but I'd be interested to know how many of these projects have been authorized. What was the average time frame from when you signed on the dotted line, the money was appropriated, and the project was built, so that we have a better idea on the timeline. And then, as Colleen mentioned, what is the likelihood of funding? I've seen a lot of federal shore protection projects. Right now in Florida, there's 25 federal shore protection projects included in Miami-Dade County.
I hear what you're saying, but in the meantime, I've been sitting here for 6 years and nothing has been done. And we actually had the Army Corps here, and they went on the record, taking some responsibility, and I just think we need to follow through. And I know for the Virginia Key project that they did about 8 or 10 years ago, the argument was the littoral flow that was interrupted by government cut. So I'm thinking, that needs to become more of a concrete plan. And I know prior councils have discussed this.
Yes.
Yes, Brett.
The breakwaters that you showed, my concern there is not only to protect us from the waves, but to make sure that they would be able to contain the sand that does go back into the ocean. I spoke with, and my memory right now is not there where I remember which city it was, but it was in New York, and I talked to their engineers that were based out of South Carolina. They used a technical term that I don't remember what it was, but it was very similar to what you're showing, and basically it was continuous all the way around and on the sides, so whatever sand we put there, when it goes into the water, it would be trapped, and then it would raise the inclination of the beach each time that would happen. That would slow down the rate that we would lose the beaches. What you're showing here, would it do that, or would that be a completely different system that we would have to look at?
Well, I think the project you're talking about is Coney Island, right? Is that in?
It wasn't Coney Island. It was in New York. It was on Long Island somewhere, but it wasn't Coney Island. Was it Southampton maybe? Yeah, it might have been Southampton.
Right, because Coney Island, our firm actually designed that, and it's actually a closed system like you see at Fisher Island. If you look at Fisher Island, it's very armored, the beach there, and the sand, they call them pocket beaches. You're right, it's a closed littoral system. If we were to completely close, Key Biscayne, we couldn't get permits to do that because you would affect Crandon and you would affect Bill Baggs. Fisher Island is and same thing at Virginia Key. Those groins there on Virginia Key, it's essentially a closed system. So, for us to make it a closed system and maintain that volume within the village would be very difficult to do because there would be either updrift or downdrift impacts. But the breakwaters, it would be a delicate balance, but that would make it more of a closed system and stabilize the beach and keep that sand within the system, so it's not moving north, so it's not moving south. Really, the idea is to significantly reduce and make the shoreline more stable.
And over time, would these breakwaters turn into a living reef or some,
it would be a great snorkel attraction, yeah. Yep. Yeah, it'd be really nice. Yeah.
Katie.
I have another question about the breakwaters, because when I've spoken to people to understand whether or not these are effective, I've gotten very conflicting reports. And it sounds like you're telling us tonight that this could be very effective. Can you explain why you can give that assurance tonight when things that I've heard in the past make it sound like, based on the way the water flows with our beach, that it really is difficult to try to retain it no matter what you put out there?
Well, that's kind of my answer to Councilmember Moss, is that for us to just armor the beach, kind of like Fisher Island, I'm trying to give everybody just a visual representation. We couldn't just say, you just couldn't build giant groins at the north and south ends of the village and just say, this is our sand and we don't care about Crandon Park, we don't care about Bill Baggs. It has to be kind of an open system, and there's a delicate balance in terms of, optimizing the design for the coastal structures. There is a lot of controversy with coastal structures. Once this process starts and we decide on a project to move forward, we're pretty far away from that process, but it is going to be controversial. There's going to be seagrass impacts. You're going to have environmentalists. They're going to be. It's not going to be an easy project. We've, in previous meetings, discussed some of the challenges. But it comes down to the engineering, the science that's done to make sure that it's done properly.
In your experience, these structures that you, I'm assuming, are recommending for our beaches, in general, what percentage of retention could we hope for or hopefully expect if we were to move forward with something like this, relative to doing nothing?
Just again, we're at a very, very high level, 10,000 foot altitude look at this. Our goal would be to retain at least 70% of the sand. If we made it a closed cell like Fisher Island, we could retain 100% of the sand. There's some other projects, some international projects where we've been able to actually retain 100%. But again, it also comes down to aesthetics. You don't want to sit if you've been to Deerfield Beach, if you've been to some other areas where in Deerfield Beach you're sitting on your beach chair and you're in between these giant rock structures. I mean, it's not a beach experience. Key Biscayne is very much a natural beach. So these structures would be offshore. You would see them a little bit at low tide, but we would try to make it as less of an impact as possible. But our goal would be to retain, to reduce the long-term shoreline recession by at least 70%.
Okay, my last question has to do with this idea that we had at one point of trying to pitch, I guess, to the federal government and all these other agencies, being able to go back to our shoreline as of, I think it was 1987. Mm-hmm. And even though we would be encroaching on dune grass that has grown since then, that we would have a right to do that based on our previous shoreline. Is that something you're still thinking about doing, or are we dropping that potential?
No, that's that. In terms of the regulatory process, and your attorneys have drafted, a summary of the ruling from 1987. This area, this project is unique because there was a 120 hearing that delayed the 1987 project. They impacted, it was around 40 acres of seagrass. Okay.
But they were able to do that without having to do mitigation.
There is no mitigation required. So there is a ruling that's in place. And certainly on the regulatory side of things, we would try to interpret that as that this area has already been impacted. Now, whether or not the agencies are going to be supportive of that, it would just depend on the process. But again, due to the increasing costs, due to the village looking for a long-term solution, and I think actually some of these rock structures, as Commissioner Moss mentioned, would become nice snorkeling attractions. So that could count towards some of these breakwaters could count towards some level of mitigation. But no, we definitely would be referencing and referring to the precedent ruling from the 1987 project for sure.
And there have been recent determinations on the state and federal level that there is mitigation that sufficiently supplants the impacts that you've made with your project. So the precedent is there, the discussion is there. It's just a matter of negotiating and getting those agreements.
And have you been having any discussions before tonight with some of these agencies and having a feel for which one of these thought processes that we have may carry some weight and get us somewhere, or are we still in the planning phase?
We're still in the planning phase. Before we initiate a project of this scale, some of the commissioners are probably going to be getting some emails tonight from some of the environmental, interest groups and NGOs. This is a very sensitive issue. We've seen some other projects, coastal structural projects that have not been successful in the permitting process because of opposition. This is not going to be an easy project. I'm not saying it's not doable. And as we have represented to the commission, it's going to require a combination of legal, lobbying, and technical support, plus a very supportive village to get a project of this scale permitted, just because of the opposition. Colleen mentioned that obviously we're going to reach out to the Corps of Engineers during the legislative sessions. Mayor Lindsay discussed with the DEP what their recommendation was, and one of their and Councilmember McCormick as well was to have the Corps of Engineers implement your project, which would be part of that Section 103. The nice thing about that is the Corps of Engineers, they don't have to get a Durham permit. They have limited requirements from the Florida DEP. So a lot of despite their bureaucratic and long-term schedule, it would eliminate some agencies that would have jurisdiction over the project. And they're certainly going to get a lot of pushback from some of the commenting agencies like U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the National Marine Fisheries. They're still, in terms of, those agencies did not recommend the 1987 project. I've looked through those files. They vehemently opposed impacts of 40-some-odd acres of seagrass. Actually, the project, because of their concerns, the project was reduced somewhat in terms of the overall impacts. But so those agencies are definitely going to be come into play. But that is an advantage of taking the route with the Section 103 project.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up to Katie's question? Have we been out to look at the seagrass, especially in those areas like Ocean Club and Silver Sands post-Irma, and see if, did we lose any?
We've just done some visual assessments.
No, if it was a hurricane.
Right. The area right in front of Ritz-Carlton, those of you that have been out to the beach, actually it's interesting, it created a bar, so there is a possibility out in front of the Ritz-Carlton where there were some additional impacts. But we're coordinating with staff to get a work order to do an updated survey. We do have, about a month or two prior to the hurricane, we completed the post-construction seagrass line and monitoring. So we have very good pre-storm data, but we have not performed any formal surveys. But that will be done later this year.
But it's important to remember that there's a seasonal dynamic to the beach, and that during these storm seasons, there's a considerable loss of the sand. And then, is it winter down here?
Winter season.
Where the sand comes back onto the
summer season.
Okay, summer season where it comes back on, and so we've seen, 10 or 15 years of these seasonal dynamics occurring here, and we've seen that the seagrasses have been able to withstand those seasonal dynamics. So you can't make a static decision right now based on what you see, because you got to do a long-term measurement.
But you bring up a good point, Councilmember. There's been, you saw how much grass was hauled. Public Works and they brought in an additional contractor to take out all the seaweed. So chances are, yes, some of that seaweed has been. So it'd be good to get a new map now when
absolutely right
after the storm.
These are our next steps, or what we need to consider.
Yes. So we have some pretty strong recommendations that are kind of no-brainers. We seek the state reimbursement on the truck haul project that you did this spring. We pursue emergency supplement with FEMA, and then that could possibly give you additional funding for whatever may happen next year, or so you evaluate these next 2 years and the impact of the beach. And so that still gives you some funding for short-term measures if you need some short-term measures. But from the state long-term beach management project, we strongly recommend that we go forward with that. And that's the feasibility study. That's the first phase. The feasibility study is actually something that is negotiated, debated, discussed with the scientists and engineers up in Tallahassee. And so, when Tim finishes that, that's what we'll do, is we'll approach that. For the Corps of Engineers, I say we don't take it off the table now based on your discussion tonight, and we just explore, see where we can get, and meet with the Florida Inland Navigation District and Miami-Dade County and see if we can partner on some of this.
Okay. So the state reimbursement is being processed, correct? This was something you worked on you submitted about a month and a half ago.
Correct.
Okay, the emergency supplement is currently being worked on, and there's data being collected to document that and to get that into place.
Correct.
So I think we're all good that needs to go. The state long-term beach, kind of mid-range, long-range, state long-term beach management project, folks, I think we all agree.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think the very long term, which we need to make shorter term than very, very long term, so we'll work on that. Because I think we need a timeline filling gaps and take affirmative actions to get it going. is also something that I think, based on Katie, what you mentioned, and what Gary mentioned in terms, and Allison, the 1987 project, and it's something, and the lack of, or the easier permitting process for an extensive fix is worth our time. Am I
Yes.
articulating what we're thinking?
But I think so, but can I clarify just one thing
Please.
on that last point? I'm not sure I see the difference between the state long-term and the Corps of Engineers long-term. It seems like it's the same project, but who do we work with in terms of reimbursement? So is that a correct statement, or is it not correct? Are they different projects for the state and for the Corps, or are they the same project with who are we going to go after first to help fund it?
The state long-term beach management project would be essentially the breakwaters with the larger scale nourishment that we just presented you the concept for. That's what the village, that's what your consultants are recommending.
Mm-hmm.
If you go through the 103.
And let me add, and that would be Moffitt and Nichols doing that work. And, and working with the state to get the funding with that, as well as me working with them, and as well as our great friend, Councilor Gomez, working with us as well.
And the very long-term Corps?
The Section 103 project, if you sign this letter with the agreement with the Corps of Engineers, the village would be the local sponsor. They would conduct the feasibility study themselves. They would look at alternatives. It might be longer-term beach nourishment, might include groins, might not include groins. You would have less control over what the Corps of Engineers proposed. But
they're not mutually exclusive, though.
Correct.
Right? They're not mutually exclusive.
Well,
you mean between the state and the feds?
Correct.
No, if you sign an agreement with the federal, that's the reason why the state's not really involved in Miami Beach and some of those projects.
Can we do both?
I think we'd want to bring back more information from the Corps before we recommend that you do both.
Okay, all right. So then,
Is the idea then that you pursue both sort of simultaneously, trying to see what's going to be a more realistic path to take?
I mean, the 103 project looks good on paper. As you heard directly from Florida DEP up in Tallahassee, they recommended considering that. It's just that, again, right now the president's budget is I just saw a presentation last week by the Corps of Engineers at the Florida Shore and Beach Conference in Fort Lauderdale. I mean, they said the president's budget is zero. Now, as Colleen was saying, as it gets through the House and the Senate, that's not likely to be the case, but it's for funding of shore protection projects is going to be an uphill battle in Washington.
But let's discuss that a little bit. This project will take no less than 7 years. We will have possibly, 2 different administrations back, at that point. And it may be that we may be first in line because we're taking that opportunity to line up our ducks. Correct. So should we be thinking along those strategic terms?
Yes, and so that's why I think it's important to have these initial discussions with the Corps of Engineers, understand their recommendations on the Section 103 projects. Understand, not only in Florida maybe, but within the Jacksonville district, but in other districts, New England and other areas, where these 103 projects, how many of them have been approved. There's, for example, in Miami Beach, the federal shore protection project is only good for another 10 years. There's a lot of doubt right now if that federal shore protection project will be extended. So the county might be stuck with Miami Beach and some of these other municipalities being responsible for their own beach management. So there's a question. A lot of these federal shore protection projects throughout Florida are coming up for expiration. Whether or not those will be renewed or not is dependent. But you bring up a good point, Mayor, is that obviously, the current administration, things can and often do change in Washington, and we are looking at the long term. But I think some of those questions will be answered in these consultations with the Corps of Engineers.
But we're talking about 2 separate items. Number one is, who are we going to get money from, the state or the federal government? Number 2, which is more important to me, is what do we do in the meantime to make sure we still have a beach? Because if this is a 5 or 6 or 7 or 10-year project, our beach isn't going to last that long.
Right.
It already hasn't lasted even a year. So what do we do in the meantime? Do we just keep putting Band-Aids on it till we get to the end of the road with this big project? Or what do we do to keep our beach a beach?
Right. The good news is that you do have active permits. You do have maintenance permits. Those permits were utilized for the 2017 project that was just completed. We were able to get permits as an event and within a couple of months. The village authorized us to move forward with permits around, I think it was just before Christmas, around December. The project was built just right before turtle season there. So that was that just kind of gives you an idea how quickly, with these permits in place, that a maintenance project can be implemented. So at least you do have options to continue with beach entrance. But right now, in terms of active permits and solutions you have, that is the only option is the continued soft solution until one of these longer term solutions. So you do. So if you take the 103 project and it takes 10 years to build that project, in those 10 years, yeah, you might have to build 2 or 3 truck haul projects.
Okay, so that's added to the cost.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
But with the
on the state level, the good news is that Senator Latvala has filed a bill that does 2 things. One is provides additional long-term committed dollars for beach renourishment projects, and then the second is that he's got it's not perfect and is not exactly where we want it, but he's got a bill out there that changes the ranking process, and so I think there are lots of projects that are bigger than yours and bigger counties, and I think there's a lot of little towns that end up not getting funded year after year.
Bigger counties?
Big counties, I should say, not bigger counties.
Okay.
Big counties versus, small city.
So we need to be focusing on that and possibly.
We do. And Fausto and I have talked about that yesterday, and that's one of the things that we're going to do. He's already had conversations with Senator Latvala.
Okay.
But we'd also recommend continued pressure on Miami-Dade County. Miami-Dade County gets quite a bit of the state coffers of funding. And they can allocate funding, to your project. And, to your comment, Mayor Lindsay, it's the government cut does have a significant impact on beach erosion here in Key Biscayne. And the county is, the port's a very, very large economic engine for the county. And they should be contributing to some of the beach management here in Key Biscayne.
Yes.
Should be. Don't.
I don't know that we've properly asked, or that we have asked with strong enough conviction.
The good news is they did contribute 25% to the 2002 project. So you do have an interlocal agreement, a precedent interlocal agreement from that project.
So what do you all need from us? Are we good in terms of?
I feel like we've got clear direction tonight, and we will follow through with the actions that each of you have recommended, and in a concerted effort in both Tallahassee and Miami-Dade County to pursue partnership on both levels.
Great.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item, please.
Next item is a presentation of a proclamation to the President of the Dade County Medical Association Board of Directors, Dr. Raul Ravelo.
Dr. Ravelo, if you could please come to our podium.
Yes.
Such a pleasure to see you here tonight. We have in this community just a wonderful group of residents who are really luminaries in their fields, luminaries in Miami-Dade County, and give so much back to our community and really are part of the fabric. And you, sir, are that. We're blessed and honored to have you be part of Key Biscayne. Dr. Ravelo was recently appointed to the Dade County Medical Association as president last June, and we had prepared a proclamation that I understand did not get to you, but it was prepared for your installation, and we just wanted to recognize you, honor you, and present you with a proclamation.
Thank you very much, Mayor Lindsay. It is my honor to receive this proclamation. Actually, it means a lot to me. I have received proclamation from the county, from Mayor Jimenez, and from Regalado, from the city of Miami. But this one means more than that. It touched my heart. And because I love this city, and this is where I raise my family. It's also an honor for the DCMA. The DCMA is one of the oldest medical societies in the state. It was founded in 1903. So we still have the picture and the plaque of the first president in 1903. Not only that, we're very active. It's one of the more active county societies in Florida. About 5 or 6 years ago, we joined together with the Broward Medical Society and the Palm Beach Medical Society, and we formed what is called the South Florida Caucus. And that means more power for the South Florida area. We now have 64 delegates or 64 votes to the FMA, to the state society. So we do drive policies and procedures, and we elect people that we like, or that at least are friendly and supportive of organized medicine. My society, the Dade County Medical Association, represents almost close to 3,000 doctors in the county. That's technically because they're members. But if you think about it, we are the only society in Dade County. So actually, everything that we do represents a total of 6,000 doctors in the county, in academic setting and in private practice setting. And as you mentioned, we have a good representation of those doctors in the key. So again, I'd like to thank you and the City Council members for this proclamation.
Well, we're honored to have you here, and we will be reading this proclamation to you into the record. And the proclamation states, whereas Dr. Raul Ravelo is a radiation oncologist practicing in South Florida since 1990 with over 30 years of experience in the field and an outstanding and valued resident of the village of Key Biscayne. And whereas Dr. Ravelo received his medical degree from the University of Zaragoza School of Medicine in Spain and received his residency training in radiation oncology at the University of Maryland at Baltimore Medical School and completed his fellowship at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York City. And whereas Dr. Ravelo served as medical director for the Radiation Oncology Center at Mercy Hospital from 2009 to 2012. During his tenure, he helped develop the first hospital-based radiosurgery program, which is CyberKnife, in Miami, Florida. And whereas Dr. Ravelo, the incoming president, has served on the board of directors of the Dade County Medical Association and is currently an executive member, his professional memberships include American College of Radiology, American Society of Therapeutic Radiology and Oncology, and America Brachytherapy. Thank you. Society. And whereas Dr. Ravelo's areas of expertise include radiosurgery and
brachytherapy.
Thank you. Radioactive implant, primarily in gynecological, prostate, and soft tissue sarcoma, head and neck cancers utilizing low-dose rate techniques. And whereas Dr. Ravelo also has vast experience in carcinosarcoma. Thank you. Of the endometrium, which is presented at the Radiation Oncology International Conference in Barcelona, Spain in 2005. Dr. Ravelo was a leading investigator for Mercy Hospital and participated in several clinical trials related to radiation oncology, some of which were based in gynecological and prostate cancers. And whereas Dr. Ravelo sees patients at the South Florida Radiation Oncology Little Havana office and affiliated centers. Now, wherefore,
I, Myra Pena-Lindsay, Mayor of the Village of Key Biscayne, Florida, wish to congratulate Dr. Ravello on his presidential installation as the next president of the Dade County Medical Association. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item, Madam Mayor, is an introduction of Hurricane Response Team enhancements of logistics and finance.
Mr. Manager?
Mayor, if I may, it's humbling to have worked with this council during Hurricane Irma, because this is one of the very, very few times that the council was able to watch exactly what we do from the beginning to end. And you learned a lot. We taught you a lot. We used a lot of terms on you. And I'm about to do it to you again. In the form of the incident command system, there are components called both the incident management team, IMT, and the incident support function. And our fire chief recognized early on, recognizing that the storm was declared a major emergency 3 days into the first week before it even hit. Our fire chief recognized that we were going to need some support, that we don't have the expertise in all areas. So he utilized what the contracts afforded us, and that was to reach out and bring in some experts that would work and live with us side by side, would understand us, would give us guidance, and would be sure that what we were doing was not only within the parameters of what's established by rules, but also what would be helpful in making this community return to normalcy quicker than most do. So I'd like to bring up tonight a couple of people that were very instrumental in that. You had mentioned before to an audience that it was humbling, again, to recognize that people and first responders leave their families for a period of time to come work here. Well, these gentlemen that I'm about to introduce, they left their families. They don't live here in Florida. They don't live here in South Florida. But they left their families. They've been here the entire time. I'm hoping to free up one of them tomorrow and use the remaining one for another week. But I'd like to introduce to the community Mr. Don Murray from New York. Don, please come up. Don's area of expertise was in our logistics section, and for logistics, the primary function there was the debris. We can do a lot of things pre-hurricane, but post-hurricane, Don, working with our Public Works Department and working with his experience in doing this in other areas before, put together a plan, put together a war board, put together direction, put together his expertise and guidance, and he made this debris program work as quickly as it did. So, Don, I personally thank you for that. We have Mr. Rob Anderson, or Bob Anderson from California. Again, recognizing that we did not have a finance director in place. Again, the recognition was we needed some financial help. Mr. Anderson lives in California. He's been part of incident management teams in the past, and his expertise in lining us up with the proper paperwork, the proper documentation, the proper direction, is going to, I honestly believe, ensure that the funding that we require, that we're requesting coming back, and I'm not talking about debris now, I'm talking about administrative funding. I think that Mr. Mr. Anderson has made sure that we were going to be able to do that. I'll probably free him up tomorrow, but he's a keeper, and if we ever have an emergency again, it's not like I'm going to seek out. I'm going to go right to him and say, "Come on back," because he learned our system. He was able to enhance our system, and we will be in a very, very good place when it comes to reimbursement. Buddy, thank you very much for all that you've done. And lastly, I want to bring up Mr. Jeff Campbell. Mr. Campbell is a contract employee with Ashbrook. I know we had strong feelings about Ashbrook. I know there were some things that were discussed, but I'm here to tell you that from the moment we crossed that Rickenbacker Causeway on that morning of September 11th to the about 35-minute drive it took to get inside the community. From that point on, Ashbrook was there for us. Ashbrook was responsible for the equipment that we needed. They knew the resources that we needed, and I call him Chuckles, and it's just because every time I see him, he's got a smile on his face, and he did not let anything deter him and deter the mission that was given to him, and that was to get this community back online. So Jeff, I appreciate all you did. I really do, sir. Thank you. Mayor, thank you.
Absolutely.
They deserve the recognition because they were there with us.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. We appreciate it.
Next item, Madam Mayor, is a resolution of the Village Council of the Village of Key Biscayne, Florida, supporting the following legislative priorities for the year 2018, providing for an effective date.
Moved.
Second.
I actually would like to move to table this.
Sure.
Given the fact that we just had a lot of direction that we came up with for the beach renourishment and what we want to do at the state level. We also, I received yesterday from Iraida Cartaya the priorities from the school, and for whatever reason, Jenny did not receive it. I'd wanted everyone to have a chance to review it. So we realized that it had not, we had a lack of communication. I think we need to review it and incorporate it. So if you humor me, if I have a second for a table, for a motion to table.
To the next council meeting, October 24th?
To the next council meeting. And thank you for your understanding.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next item under reports and recommendations, mayor and council members. It's PACE program, board selection. Vice Mayor Kaplan.
We had the opportunity, we learned, or we were reminded, to appoint a board member to the PACE board. Maybe I could, Chad is actively involved presently with PACE. Maybe you could remind our colleagues about our efforts to partner up with other communities a number of years ago.
So in 2012, 7 municipalities in South Dade came together to create a partnership called the Green Corridor, which offers energy efficient, renewable energy and wind resistant improvements on your property. So that's like solar panels, energy efficient AC units, or impact resistant windows, for example, to be installed on your property, and in return, the property owner is specially assessed voluntarily, and that payment is put on your tax bill and paid over time. Key Biscayne was an early, not the original 7 members, but was an early city to speak with some of those other cities, which are City of Miami, Coral Gables, Cutler Bay, Pinecrest, Miami Shores, South Miami, and Palmetto Bay. And as a result of Key Biscayne being an early, have early interest, the board approved Key Biscayne a seat on the board. In fact, there's I don't know how many exact members now around the state, but there's only 7 right now voting members with an open seat that Key Biscayne, well, there's 7 and then there's an at-large seat, but Key Biscayne was offered a seat on the board which has never been filled. So I guess somehow Vice Mayor Kaplan was speaking, I believe, to maybe some of the members of the board where it came up in that way, or
it was my initiative initially. Originally, we thought it was worth not only joining but encouraging activity and you know institutional infrastructure to make it really work and to make it meaningful in the communities that participate. The reason it came up now is because of the solar panel Floss Sun presentation a few months ago, and we were reminded there's a seat for you, and I think we should fill it. Why not?
And I should add, it's not really well known, but the Green Corridor, which is the partnership of the cities, actually funded a grant to that program of $75,000 to kickstart it here in Dade County. That was an initiative of theirs.
So we've had a good reception to the Floss Sun thing, I'm told. I think our community will start to take advantage of the opportunities to install this type of equipment more than has been the case in recent years. And if we can be involved in leadership in the financing end of this and in the policy or advocacy end of this, we should. So we need to appoint somebody. It's not a committee, it's a board.
Yeah, it's a board. Currently, any technically, under the rules of the board, any property owner can be appointed. The board currently consists of mayors, commissioners, and a former mayor. So it's, up to Key Biscayne. You guys can decide how you want to handle it.
So that's it. We don't need to make this decision, I suppose, at a special meeting. But if we feed ideas as to who we think might be a suitable representative for Key Biscayne on this board, I'd encourage us to do so.
Great. Thank you for bringing this up.
Next item, Madam Mayor, is the status on property acquisition located at 85 West Enid Drive, also known as the Village Hall parking lot. Mayor Lindsay.
Yes, this has been something that has been floating around for the last 6 years. We were close to closing on it, and then we haven't heard back. And as we are doing our budget process, it's something that came to mind. Where are we? And is this something that could possibly be finalized in 2017? Should we budget for it?
We should. There is a placeholder number. I think
Yes.
the number is $100,000 inflated. If I remember, it's $1.4 million. The obstacles that we faced that caused this thing to take more time in 2016 than we projected were overcome. We have exactly one gating issue left, which is the Board of County Commissioners' approval.
Yes.
Yeah, and if I can add, we have been in conversation with the county attorney's office, and I believe as a result of the storm and everything else that in the backlog, we initially were supposed to be on the October Board of County Commissioners agenda, but I know that we now are not making that agenda, but we're hopeful we will be on it soon. We've asked the county attorney's office to provide confirmation to us as to when it is actually placed. So it may be worth reaching out to maybe the county commissioner and seeing, because right now I believe that everyone has signed off and it's just a matter of it getting put on the BCC board.
This could be a consent agenda, couldn't it? Because this is signed off. There's nothing controversial any longer. The documentation is all agreed to. The price is agreed to.
I mean, I'm not sure of the county's rules if they require a hearing if they're selling property, but my understanding is that from our perspective, and everything has been signed off, and we're just waiting to get into that.
If you could please circulate the document when it's published, I guess that it'll be in whatever their preliminary agenda is.
Sure.
And if you think it would be something that is just a slam dunk and it's going to happen, or if you want council members to reach out to different commissioners, if you want them to attend, we need to plan for that.
Okay.
The document's locked. Why don't you just circulate it?
I'm sorry.
Shouldn't one of us, reach out and speak to the commission?
We can. This was, I don't think this is just a hurricane delay. Our negotiation was resolved in April. It's months since then. So I think that it's probably in the nature of something that's not a big priority at the county, and we should make it so I'm happy to do that.
Would it benefit if we all came to the meeting if we knew it was on the list?
Yes.
I mean, if we literally just showed up, would that be helpful?
I think it would be unnecessary, but it's never hurtful, but I think it would be unnecessary.
Okay.
This is really perfunctory at this point.
I can tell you from the meetings I've been to that it's appreciated by the county commission. It's a respect issue.
This isn't, the nature of this at this point this is not a Key Biscayne, Miami-Dade County thing. This is a absolutely ministerial disposition of WASD property pursuant to a statute. I don't think that this has got anybody's attention as a Key Biscayne thing. Maybe it should to get this on the agenda quicker than it would otherwise, because it's just not a priority for the county. So I think the right thing to do is to try to make it a priority and get it on the agenda.
Chad, can you please circulate the document that we have not seen?
The deed, or you mean the
Whatever is
whatever's good
the deed
prepared?
and whatever is going to be
Okay.
signed off on, so
Okay.
that we know what we're
There'll be a cover memo that explains the process, and there's the deed.
And the deed, and I believe the deed's already been agreed to and everything else as to legal form. So yeah, we can circulate it.
Thank you. Okay.
Next item, Madam Mayor, is scheduled town hall meeting Hurricane Irma. And I thought maybe this was the best way to circulate a few dates if everyone is in agreement with it.
Actually, I think we've all discussed at different junctures that we need a look back to assess what's worked, what hasn't worked, what needs to be documented and replicated and improved in the event of a storm in the future. I think it would be best practice to leave those documents to future councils, also to address issues that have arisen, whether it is, debris collection, village-wide, what is the best practice, what should we do in the future, and, now and in the future, all of these type of issues, storm drains and screenings, all those things that, again, FPL, we just need to discuss openly and in great detail. So
As an
dates.
option,
Yes.
we have a regular scheduled council meeting November 14th, which is a Tuesday. So as an option, November 13th, which is a Monday, or Thursday, possibly November 16th.
You have the dates that I'm going to be out?
You are back.
Okay.
You are back.
I definitely want to be here for that.
You're back that week.
What week is it again?
The week of November 13th. Because we have a regular scheduled council meeting November 14th.
I don't remember. I just saw it.
Either's good with me.
Either's good with me, too.
Yes?
I'm here that week.
Would you like 6 o'clock, November 13th then, or maybe so you don't have back-to-back nights?
I think
Possibly.
Thursday might be better, so it's not back to back.
Okay, so Thursday, November 16th?
6 p.m.
6 p.m.
Excellent.
The next item is reschedule the October 9, 2017 kite surfing workshop. Mayor Lindsay.
Sure, just, I want to address this as quickly as possible. It's something that has been looming over our heads and pending for years. But we do have a challenge with trying to catch up with our meetings and also with making sure that everyone, all the interested parties are ready. And it's been expressed that it's a lot to handle so quickly. So if we could reschedule for a couple of weeks, it might be that it's a more fruitful exercise.
When did we say the season really started? Does anyone remember?
It's in the winter. It's in the winter.
It is in the winter.
Eric knows.
Today? So I think trying to find the balance between as soon as possible but giving people time is important.
Yes, absolutely.
What was originally scheduled for the 9th?
October 9th, which would be next week. And we have a meeting tomorrow, and we have a meeting the 10th.
And then, an executive session at 6 o'clock on the 10th and a 7 p.m. budget hearing. And following that, you have a council meeting Tuesday, October 24th. Do you think maybe if it were to be for a legislative change to some sort, we wouldn't be able to do anything really because of the November 14th meeting?
Well, it's just a workshop.
It's just a so in reality, you know, it doesn't matter.
And November 1st, is that too far out? It's a Wednesday?
What is this for?
Kite workshop.
I won't be here on November. I'm getting back on November 1st.
Correct, you're not. Does November
2nd?
Doesn't work for me.
Time after the 1st.
I would hate to.
What time do you get back on the 1st?
Put so many.
Here from the airport.
Gary did.
I'm not doing it.
He set precedent.
Yeah, but he had something to do. He had something to do. I did.
No, how about the week of November 6th, which is the week before the council meeting date of the 14th?
What is the idea of that you mentioned
I think it's important that we tried. We said to the people who came, especially residents who were concerned with the safety, that we would try to address this and to resolve it as quickly as possible. Right. And we had set a date that was at, I guess, the very, very beginning of the season, right, so that we could try to hash out our procedures. And I understand we had a hurricane and now we have a council meeting like every week, but I think it's important that we try to do it.
Well, if you think it's important enough that and you want to do it when I'm away, then that's okay. I mean,
When do you leave?
The 22nd.
It's a workshop and not an
So
action.
I won't be here on the 24th, which is the council meeting.
Is there not enough time if we just push it back 1 week?
That's what I was wondering.
We don't have anything that week of the 16th.
The week, I'm sorry.
Of October.
Of October.
Of October.
I'm good.
And then if we want to take any kind of action, we'll be here the next week.
Let's do it.
I won't be here then, but go ahead and have the workshop.
And will you be here the next week if we want to take some action?
Yes, I'll be here for the 24th, but I won't be here that week before that.
I'll be watching.
Okay.
You know, this is less about the policy and more about solutions.
Exactly.
Correct.
This is a feasibility workshop.
And
I think those solutions are going to come from the kiteboarding community.
I would suggest that,
I hope,
especially since I'm not going to be at the workshop if it's that week, that we come forward with some pretty strong guidelines, because we know what we're dealing with. I don't want to make this about kite surfing right now, but we've got people that adamantly believe it's a great sport and it's completely safe and they should be able to do whatever they want to do when they want to do it because it doesn't endanger anybody. And we've got people on completely opposite ends of the spectrum, and we're going to sit here in a workshop listening to both of them just like we have in the past. Ultimately, it's going to be up to us to legislate some set of rules that will maybe not make either side totally happy, but we'll get this thing resolved. So
if it's possible.
If it's possible, and it may not be, but I mean,
yes,
have the workshop because
want to
we
do the 17th since that's
17th is good with me.
Good with me.
Works.
Excellent.
At 6 p.m.?
Yes, please.
Next item, Madam Mayor, is emergency expense for natural disasters in gated communities. Councilmember Moss.
Thank you. So this came up about 2 weeks ago when we had the debris removal meeting, emergency meeting, and I asked the question, you know, are the condos included in it? And the answer was that FEMA does not, will not reimburse on private properties. Before I start, John, I just want to thank you. There's not a criticism towards how you implement the actions that you did, and I think you guys did a great job. But I think, and I'm also glad that we're going to be having this hearing on on Hurricane Irma, so we can learn. And as you said it, we learned a lot of what worked, what didn't work, and I think there's places that we can improve. But I was surprised. I was surprised when I heard that. You know, we're only picking up from the public right-of-ways, and that many of the condos, not all of them, a lot of them had help because they are in front of public right-of-ways, but there are many condos that are extremely large, and they were on their own to remove the debris. And I want to make clear that when I'm talking about the cost of removing it is when the trucks are actually lifting it up into the back and removing it off into the first center that it goes to. I'm not talking about piling it up as the landscapers are doing, and everybody should be responsible for their own property for that. So there's two issues that come up. One, as a village, we decided to put $4 million in our reserve account aside for emergencies. And a large majority of that goes towards debris cleanup, especially on this hurricane, since a lot of it was landscape. Now, the other side is that we have FEMA, and FEMA reimburses and has certain rules of reimbursing back to communities for certain removal. But I want to put FEMA aside for a minute and say, okay, without FEMA, pretend it doesn't exist, we have $4 million. That $4 million is there to provide a service to all of our residents. And that service is to clear debris. A part of that service is to clear debris for public safety and during public concern. Well, if you were driving on the streets in the Ocean Club where I live, there were large piles, just as large as you saw anywhere in Key Biscayne. So if Key Biscayne is declaring a public concern and public safety on any of the sidewalks, so does the Ocean Club, so does Key Colony and other large gated communities have. Now, we know that everywhere in the nation, when this happens, the homes will bring out all the debris and they'll put it in the public right away, and it will get picked up. Now, the large communities could do it. They're not supposed to, but they could. But we would be seeing a large mound, a mountain of debris that would be encroaching into Crandon, causing traffic problems and much larger public safety issues. So what the condos do is they pay to remove it themselves. However, they are taxpayers there that put taxes out for this service. And this is being held for the service. So I don't see why there's a discrimination going on between these two, and it makes me uncomfortable. Whether I live in a condo or not, if this was happening to anybody, it would make me very uncomfortable to see why anybody would be treated differently. Now, going back to FEMA, FEMA does have a program within it that's called private property debris removal, and it can be done. But we need to set it up as a policy to put this in our plan that we want to try to go for this when certain things happen. And there was an article that was sent to me by one of our residents that talked about the county of Beaufort County in South Carolina. So I went ahead and called and had a half-an-hour discussion with the head administrator of the county there. And they were looking at a $45 million debris removal after Matthew. They got 90 gated communities approved by FEMA. And he told me exactly how they do it. And the first thing we have to do is declare that there is a public concern and there's a public safety problem. And there is, when you have large debris, if there's a fire or police assistance, they need to get around that debris inside the private properties. So there is concern there. If somebody dropped a lit cigarette into one of those, it can cause a huge fire that could spread very quickly. It attracts rats, snakes, all kinds of stuff. And there are children that live there that need to walk around sidewalks with people driving around. So for me, I see that there are public concerns in these gated communities. I don't think it's fair to ask for these large communities to have to pile all the stuff up onto their inner roads, then put them in trucks, then come outside and dump it on the side of the road in order to get that service. I think it's okay for us to put a plan together where we can say, look, if there is a public safety issue, we can go ahead and already have the plan ahead of time where we have the entry, the legal documents for entry that we need to put together and say, once we declare this, we can come in and we'll remove the stuff. We won't cut the trees down and pile it up for you. You need to do that just like every other owner in Key Biscayne needs to do. But we will come in and we'll put it on the trucks and we'll take it out. Now,
well, do we have to do that, or can the gated communities do it themselves and get reimbursed?
Well, that's something that we would have to talk about.
That's
and
part of the policy discussion.
Given the way we do things with procurement and everything, that we would have to have policies in place.
Well, so what we need to do is establish the policies,
yes,
and get that done. And I think, I'm all for that. I mean,
my understanding in Beaufort, they came and did it. They did it themselves. They didn't allow the gated communities to do it. Now, some gated communities didn't want it. They said, I don't want to wait for the government to come. I want to take it out in 2 days. They took it out themselves.
And that's fine. I think if we can find a way to make it so that we have the best chance of getting reimbursed by FEMA, then I think that that's the way we should do it. You know what I mean? And I don't really believe that we need to have the village be the one that establishes the way that the gated communities do it unless FEMA requires that, and I don't think so. I don't think that FEMA requires that, you know, the village to be the one that determines.
It still has to be monitored.
And I think that's, we need to, that's what we,
Well,
the devil's in the
The monitoring
details.
step is a big one, right?
Yeah.
Like we heard
No, no,
Mr.
well,
Ramsey
no, it has to
talking
be
about
mo-
the total bill
has to be
for
monitored.
Botanica included landscaping issues and replacement of things. What FEMA reimburses us for is the removal of our debris, right? So there has to be monitoring in place. There have to be real.
There's no question about it that we have to have the same requirements that the village is doing. But do we really need, does the village have to run into into the gated communities and do
I'll
this?
tell you what, why don't we
I
study
think we need to
all the
study it and
facts?
do it right, that's all.
Who do we get this information from, though?
I believe there's a public PA designation from FEMA that we can talk to directly, and that could help us establish this.
Mr. Manager, I know that you were working on this for the workshop, that you were exploring who the experts who we would need to give us guidance at the workshop for these type of issues, and do you have that person lined up?
No.
Okay.
Is this with
We
this
talked
work?
about it very.
We talked about the workshop, but
We talked about having experts.
we're still trying to get through the daily.
Okay.
But we will,
But
knowing a date and time, and I will circulate to you.
Perfect.
Like we did many years ago, a list of names and a list of positions or what their officials in, so that we have a good cross. And a FEMA representative would certainly be one of them.
Perfect.
Why can't we do something before that? We have, I think, the ability to go directly to FEMA and say, based upon your rules, here's what we want to do, and we want you to help us put together a plan that fits within your guidelines, so that when we do go to the gated communities, we will still qualify for reimbursement. That, to me, is the starting point, because we need a framework which will allow us to get reimbursed for that, just like for all the other parts of our cleanup, and then go to our various associations or whoever they appoint to take the lead on their part and say, here's what we need to do for FEMA to get reimbursed. Now let's implement a plan that falls within these rules and get it done.
No, that's going forward. You know, we still got to worry about, we still got to talk about what happened and how we're going to deal with the gated communities today, you know, with the expenses they've already suffered.
Yes.
You know, because I agree with you with regards to the, you know, the fund that was established by everybody, by one village, and that one village needs to stand up for this village.
But before we get, I agree with you, but before we get there, why don't we decide on one thing? How we're going to approach getting our ducks in a row going forward? Who's going to take the lead if we agree going to FEMA and working with them and developing a plan that will work for the gated communities? Who's going to take the lead, and how do we do it? And what's our time frame?
I think that we need to tell the manager that that's what we'd like to do.
That's in our manager's wheelhouse.
The manager's going to tell you right now that it's just not that easy. Okay?
It's what?
Just not that easy. You'll make it seem as though FEMA has got all the resources necessary. FEMA is working worldwide right now.
Well, I didn't say it was easy, John. I'm just saying
I'm
I think that's
not
our
shying
plan
away
of
from it
action.
being easy. I'm shying away from what's practical, what's the level of expectation. And I don't think, I will certainly try, but I don't think that I can go to the FEMA representative and get them to work on a plan for us today, tomorrow, or next week.
I think that's backwards. That's not what I said.
I perceived it that way.
We
so I
don't want
apologize.
them to work on a plan for us. We want to work within their guidelines for reimbursement and develop our own plan. But right now, we don't know what those guidelines are for gated communities.
I think what he's worried about is that right now is not the right time to do it, okay?
It's worth looking into.
Okay.
I will give you, it's worth looking into.
Why don't you read the PA and tell us what it says?
Well, the PA, I mean, it's very, very clear, but there's another component of this, and that is that each emergency, after we establish a policy, has to have that declaration that it's either a public interest or it's a nuisance or it's safety.
But we've done that. Now, if we did it in connection with the decision with SFM. If we need to be more specific about that, we declared exigent or emergency circumstances, among other things. If we need to be more specific about the fact that that extends to the condominiums, but it extended island-wide, village-wide at least.
So I think we've done that. Now,
But, well, you may need to have, finding of fact and documentation as to why it's exigent. And I know, we had boots on the ground making those findings and documenting, and it's something that someone may need to do, behind the gates in the gated communities, just to check that box.
Brett brought up, and he has it in front of him, he brought up the fact that there are certain things, regulations, certain liability issues that would have to be addressed. Once they are addressed, they're in place.
Yep.
It's not like you have to keep jumping back and forth once they're in place. We can begin working on that.
Yeah, so just very quickly, I just want to go with the two most important things that the Beaufort County did. One was, as soon as the storm that happened, they got together and they declared because of the public concern, they declared a public state of emergency because of the debris that included private properties and public properties. That was the first thing they did, and that was a check off the box of one of the things that FEMA would require. And then the second thing they did is they got the legal, what they call I have it here, signed right of entry from each owner. So they had to go to each condo or each gated community and go to each one of them and say, I need you to sign this to give me the right of entry. So our government can come in, vehicles, contractors can come in and get this. So they had to do that. And then they worked with the PA to make sure the monitoring and everything was happening correctly.
Is that part of what FEMA requires?
That was part of what FEMA requires. So what he said, what they started figuring out in their plan is do a pre-plan that already has a sign right of entry from every community or private property that may need it in the future, and we hold those on file. And when we're ready to go, they already know that we're ready to come in. And all we got to do is get together, and we have to see the damage there, and we say, hey, this is a public concern. We need to take care of this also for these residents. And I just don't think it's fair that they have to come up with the money to haul it. They have to come up with the money to put it together. But if everybody's getting hauled, they should also be able to get hauled too.
But there's one piece of this that I think we really need to work on and clarify. Every single family homeowner obviously has to pay for the cleanup of their own yard, and whoever cleans it up puts it in front of their yard next to the street. Well, the condos can't do that, but I think what the condos can do is to designate certain spots within their community, and maybe we can come up with a number of spots, for example, for each gated community, so that we don't have 48 different spots within the Commodore Club. Maybe we have 5 or 6 or 10. And then it can be done in an organized fashion, because your point about dumping mountains on Crandon Boulevard or any other public road, to me, is the most important point of all. We just can't have that. But we also can't have, within a large condo project, 100 different pickup points. It has to be organized in some fashion that it makes sense for the condo association and it makes sense for our pickup plan. So that's what I think working together on will make the most sense to try to accomplish this. And maybe, Tony, you can put together a group of your condo presidents or whoever and come up with sort of a tentative plan for each one of the gated communities as far as how many pickup spots make sense for you and where they might be and so on. And then we can coordinate it within the gates of your community in a fashion that makes sense financially, and hopefully that'll also comply with FEMA.
And you can probably use some of the new relations that you established to talk with the condo people because, they're probably going to be the ones that are picking up, right? So that we know what they think, and maybe you're saying there shouldn't be 100. Well, maybe they prefer 100 as opposed to 3 big ones. I don't know what the answer is.
But maybe FEMA won't accept that.
Maybe they won't.
I mean, we need to.
I understand that, but I mean, it all has to be, like one cohesive thing, and I think the manager is the guy that has to run that. I don't think, I don't think that we should be involved in that. I think really that we need to tell the manager what we'd like to do. And as soon as it can happen, I'm sure it can happen today, or tomorrow, next week, because there's a lot of other disasters that are being taken care of. But he has to come up with a plan and bring it to us and say, this is what I've come up with, and I'm sure he will.
And listen, I invite our residents and what lessons learned from this year, from this hurricane, as to what, how it impacts, because every piece of property and all the access roads are different. But when we need to consider that. So during the workshop, if we have condominium presidents or managers who have suggestions, things that worked, things that didn't work, it may be, or things that we need to consider in coming up with a policy that is compliant with FEMA. It's the time to do this fact-finding is now.
Just a suggestion, Tony, for the pyramids, the pile should go in front of Mike Davies' car.
Or maybe on top of it, he wanted a new car.
Yeah. That'd be a good solution.
Can I have a point of privilege?
Tony, you're going to have so much privilege at our workshop.
No, just very simple.
No.
It's an interlocutory agreement between the condos and the village.
Yeah. Could be.
Maybe. It's a possibility.
Could be.
Next,
So- Yeah, go ahead.
I'm so sorry.
No, I was just gonna say I'm looking forward to the meeting, and I think that this should be a big topic that we should talk to and talk about. And Louis, like you said, what has already happened, I think that we can discuss that with our legal counsel and manager to see if what avenues there are, if there are, and discuss that maybe at the workshop. We could have some of that information there.
Well, I mean, the avenues that you're talking about are as to reimbursement. But
that's a possibility.
reimbursement
I don't know if it
is
is.
one thing.
Yeah.
You know, the right thing to do is another.
Yeah.
Okay? And I think the right thing to do is we need to have a plan on how we're going to reimburse them for a significant amount of their expenses.
If the policy going,
What's that?
Yeah, I think it's important to look at that.
No, I
we
don't
did
think so.
everything we
That's-
could
that's-
trying to sort of manage. Almost, if you look at it like this storm, we tried to manage the spending of FEMA's money, right?
Okay.
And
But you're not getting me. Well, you're not understanding what I'm saying. I'm not suggesting that we be limited by FEMA's money, okay? I'm suggesting that we need to do the right thing because we have a fund that's put together with everybody's money. And this is one island. It's not just the single family homes that we're supposed to be looking after with FEMA. We're looking after everybody. And unfortunately, we didn't have the policy set up for the multiple family residences. We should have had that done. We didn't have it, and therefore we can't go backwards to set it up. The fact that we're not going to be reimbursed for theirs probably is reality. So we still have to deal with the expenses. We can't just ignore the expenses because we're not going to get reimbursed by FEMA and because we failed to do something that it was our responsibility to do. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's my point. You might
I think this is
disagree.
something that we can have a really, really full and frank discussion about at our workshop.
Policy decision, and I think we need to have a lot of facts in front of us. And,
Okay, well,
we also need to think of intended consequences and unintended consequences, and that's why we're having the workshop.
And I just shot the first shot because I really do believe it's not fair. you know.
Okay.
And which of course cuts both ways, right? Like there's lots of issues which is why we need to have a workshop, right? Because there's people who are going to have concerns about paying for this massive beach project and how many people benefit from that. This equally the same. I'm just saying we cannot, I agree with you that we need to address this and we need to have a policy and we need to be fair, but we need to make sure that we do everything in a responsible way, and I think the workshop is a great way to do it.
There's no question about it. Responsible is what we're supposed to be doing up here.
Next
But we have to make the tough decisions.
Sorry.
Next item, under the village attorney's report, discussion regarding solar panel permit waiver.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. My office was contacted by the mayor and Councilmember Dela Cruz regarding potentially waiving solar panel permit fees for the installation of solar panels in the village. I think that there was an email blast that went out last week regarding Miami Beach's program. The city of Coral Gables instituted this probably a year and a half ago. And the concept that Coral Gables started with and other municipalities have kind of piled on is to waive the permit fees for solar panels, but it's only the municipal fees, because a building permit fee consists of county and state fees also. So after speaking, after I know that the mayor had reached out to Steve and Luis had reached out to me, we prepared a resolution that's before you tonight that if it's the policy of the council, you could waive the village's permit fees for the installation of solar panels only. I know that the administration also has some research as to how many solar panels have actually been installed in the last couple of years, and that might help your decision on, what the fiscal impact may be also.
I believe that we discussed this before it came up before council as to what public policy did we want to put out there in terms of really supporting and encouraging greening of Key Biscayne, and this was something that was discussed, and we wanted for it to be brought back. So after seeing that article, which Luis also saw, and we both acted upon it, it was a follow-up, and the financial impacts are fine, but I think it was, despite financial impacts, it was something that my recollection is that we were interested in doing. And Luis.
Yeah, one of the things that that we have to consider is what is financial impact on us with respect to permit fees. And so I asked Sergio, and I don't think,
We don't want to bankrupt him.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members, Sergio Escunce. So far, we've only had one installation of solar panels on a residential home. Total permit costs for that without the county or state fees is $336. So and this is a $40,000 installation. So it's really a very, very small percentage of permit fee versus the cost of the actual installation. I don't know that waiving fees in that sense would make one way or the other. Our fees are not as high as Miami Beach's $3,000 fees. That's for sure on these type of installations. So
right. So based on that, I don't think it's a financial impact on us. What it is a sign to the community that we really should start thinking about this seriously.
Small incentive. And a small incentive.
And I really suggest that we really think about it and go for it.
Can we bring this back next council meeting, folks?
Sure.
Yes.
Do you think this is a good idea within your department?
Yes, absolutely. Anything that helps motivate, something like this to be green. There's a lot of programs out there. The state, there's also financial incentives on the federal level as far as income tax to a resident. Florida Solar Energy Center is the representative. It's kind of the state organization that reviews solar panels for Florida, approves them, and kind of puts them together as a package for permitting. They have a program for that. And there are a lot of ordinances and there are a lot of state policies that provide incentives for this.
Do you know if all solar panels are created equally, so to speak? And should there be some incentive for certain products versus others? Or should we just do this as a blanket?
There are different manufacturing, but for Florida, the good news is that they all go through the Florida Solar Energy Center and they get approved for use in Florida. That's in state statute. Okay, and a few years ago, there was a program put together as a result of Broward County's involvement in a pilot program to make permitting much easier. And they now have that online for different sizes of systems for residential and even larger installations, where engineers can submit information and it gets approved as a package and it makes permitting a lot easier. That was the goal of that endeavor, was to make permitting a lot easier, because before that, permitting was a challenge in any municipality not across just this state, but across the nation as well.
So in addition to doing this, can we as a village have a marketing component to let people know that we've made this move and we'd like to encourage people to consider it?
Absolutely, and probably about 3 months ago, Frank, I think you were there also, there was a presentation and a creation of a regional co-op for solar panels, and the idea of doing that was to pull interested sources together to lower the prices of solar panels. And that was put out there so we can remind people that there is now a co-op available that reduces prices. Solar panels are absolutely great, but they are not great cost savers or almost budget neutral. And so anything that incentivizes people to do the right thing, I think is good. Yes, Brett?
I thought you were going to say no, because that's more permit fees for your department. But I was waiting for it, but I'm happy. No, I just want to say that I don't think they're all created equal. There's many different types of solar panels. But I just want to say that I'm in strong support of anything that has to do with renewable energies, water collection, rooftop gardens, any of this type of stuff. But I'm glad that we have this time, because I'd like to always challenge my first initial reaction to it to see if there's anything that I'm missing. But I'll be in strong support so far.
Excellent. Please bring it back.
Next item, Madam Mayor, under the Village Manager's Report, discussion on monument signs.
Council and Mayor, good evening. As was pointed out by Vice Mayor Kaplan earlier this evening, this has been a rather lengthy process. It goes back to the year 2010. You were using names that have been a long time with Bonnie and things like that. We got involved. I got involved in this late this summer. And I know that I've seen at least twice Mario has sat in the room with a little presentation to make regarding monument signs and how it affects businesses. I've had a conversation with the chamber, but I think this is another one of those issues tonight that's more along the lines of a policy decision. I know that my building, zoning, and planning director has development department director has put together a report that shows what we currently are dealing with here on Key Biscayne. So I would like to turn it over to either the council or, again, you've got the information in your packet, not necessarily to go over it all again, but at least to get some ideas.
And this is directed somewhat at Frank. My recollection is that this goes way beyond 2010, that this was when the code was actually being adopted. There was very healthy, vigorous discussion as to what the policy of the village was. And there was discussion, for example, that Burger King wouldn't come because, and what the feel of the village and the community was going to be, and the whys, and that this was primarily a residential community, and it had a main, so the idea of a main street and not a business district, but having that be, you know, vibrant, not while encouraging. So I wish, and I had asked Madam Clerk, and I know it was very difficult to find, and I hope you do find it, but I do think putting it in the context of what our, you know, founding residents envisioned and the policy decisions, I think that's important, and I don't think we've captured it yet. But Frank, you were involved in this, and so I'd like you to share some of that.
The last time
I can't believe you kept it, Gina. Let you.
No, I have all of it. I have everything. All of which will be turned over to the Historical and Heritage Society at the appropriate time. This goes all the way back. Mario and I met a couple weeks ago after our last meeting, and I did go back into my own files to try to jog my memory. And I found this assemblage, all of which from our Zork, which started in 2007, and lasted about 2.5 years, came to a point of unanimity that monument signs would be prohibited. However, and there was a lot of discussion about signage, in part, and I was prompted to remember this by the video that Jennifer circulated the other day. The charter amendment that came about when the entry block, not the entry block, the Sonesta was under redevelopment, interfered with our ability, both on the Zork and at the council, to deal with definitions. And as we had pointed out at the time, there are 11 pages of sign definitions that are, in my opinion, all over the place and basically impertinent to our regulation as it was in effect before the ZORC and as it was in effect after the 2010 amendments. We couldn't deal with that, and we couldn't deal, therefore, more systematically as we had hoped to with the signs, the whole sign regulations, because the decision was made at the time not to go to an election. And to do a more comprehensive amendment would have required an election. So that, number one. And number two, we had a long and difficult and important distraction in our regular work to deal with the HR district towards the end. And that was corresponding to the end of term of the second Vernon Council and a very strong desire to finish the zoning work, you know, insofar as that it had been worked on for 2.5 years and was in many respects, in our collective opinions, a great and qualitative advancement over what existed, with an imperfect but still salutary signage improvement. Imperfect, but still salutary. And as Mario and I were reflecting on this, and also aided by another video from earlier, from March 2010, before the October 2010 meeting when the ZORC recommendations were improved, there had been substantial discussion about how to deal, not specifically, I think, with monument signs, but with the opportunity to help businesses better identify themselves, particularly in the centers that are more or less obscure because of their design. And the decision in March of 2010, which was not really carried forward, curiously, in October 2010 when the zoning ordinance was adopted, was to work with the Chamber of Commerce and to try to figure out, more or less on a property-by-property, case-by-case basis, what would be consistent with the aesthetic standard that you rightly remember, which was a major driver, and also with the business's desire to be able to be better identified in appropriate cases, certainly. And appropriate cases specifically didn't mean every commercial property. Okay, and I'll wrap this up quickly. Didn't include every commercial property. For example, the Oasis doesn't need a monument sign. Harbor Plaza, I think, doesn't need a monument sign. The churches, the monument signs exist and are inoffensive. The condominium monument signs within the property at Ocean Club are really unrepresented. They're not commercial signs at all. So there are differences for properties, for purposes, some of which are commercial, some of which are not. The ones that are historical are largely, possibly with the exception of the arcade, inoffensive. What didn't happen is we didn't deal ever with the sunsetting effect of the 2010 zoning ordinance. Chad was the lawyer representative on the ZORC from beginning to end, and we both recalled that the sunset provision on signage was part of the original code from earliest inception. And possibly because it just was a residual that was not really part of the ZORC work at all, or because we intended to come back to it later and fix it case by case, as we had discussed in March of 2010, we just didn't do that. The Village of Key Biscayne has never done that. So now we have non-conforming and sunsetted signs throughout the village. My own personal view is that I didn't intend to sunset the Key Biscayne Presbyterian Church or the Yacht Club. That's silly. I did intend, and I think we all intended on the ZORC, and the zoning code reflects this, that monument signs would not be perpetuated as a matter of right everywhere in the commercial district throughout the village. So I view this report as rather unhelpful because it doesn't discuss the history And it compares the village of Key Biscayne to places like Aventura and Hialeah and Coral Springs, which is ridiculous, because we don't want to be like. The very specific driver on this was aesthetics. The afterthought and the sort of check and balance on that driver was the desire to be responsive to the needs of businesses, case by case, property by property. I'm prepared to revisit that from 2010. I told Mario this when we were together. I have rather strong opinions in my own mind about the purpose of signage and limitations on what appropriate signage should be here, having studied this for a very long time and debated this extensively. But I think we should revisit it.
I'm with you. I'm going to cede the floor to Brett.
Thank you.
Patient.
I'm going to basically just kind of go off of what you said, Frank, there at the end. I'm still a little bit on the fence about this issue because whatever decision we make makes, it's a long-term decision and it has implications that we need to make sure that we can foresee, which is difficult to do. But in the report, I'm just reading on the first page that was submitted, I kind of analyzed, not the first page, the first diagram, the map. I was just taking a look at it, trying to take apart what we have on the map there. One, I agree with Frank. I circled it very big. All the monument signs inside the condominium, such as the Ocean Club, do we regulate those monument signs, or that's private property? They can go ahead and put whatever they want in front of their building.
I think the effect of the ordinance, unless we change it, is that everything in the Ocean Club is not only non-conforming, but now sunsetted and illegal.
So inside of private property, it would be illegal to have a sign to show the building in there, which is probably more confusing to get around than anywhere.
I don't know if that's the
on the
case.
key.
I think that, and I'm going to look it up right now, but I think that the sign code applies to signs that can be seen from the public right-of-way.
That's what I thought.
Private roads, that may not be the case.
Why do you think that?
I'm going to look it up, but
that's my recollection from first-year property class, and I can't believe that kind of rung a bell.
I don't think it's a common law principle. I think it's our code. But if that's the case, let us know.
Okay, so in that map, I took those 10 signs out of the equation, out of the 32. So we're down to 22 signs that I see here. 2 of them, 1 and 3, are the gas stations. We have absolutely no control over that. That's there by law, and we can't do anything with it.
Right.
So those 2 are going to stay there no matter what. Then what?
Excuse me. What do you mean that it's there by law?
It's a state law.
It's a state law that they have to have a certain size sign with certain prices on it, and we can't do anything about it.
That only
It's not
happened.
another condominium
No.
rule kind.
It only happened a year ago.
Then there are signs along the road that are for 10 of them are for condos, the entrance to condos, so, and they're spread out. Some of them are along Crandon, some of them are off of Crandon, but we have 10 of those there. Then we have 3 churches, I believe, have signs along there, which I think makes sense to have those because people are trying to find a church and they might not know which one it is.
And Coral Gables, that says no signs, has all of these signs. They have all these exceptions. They have the churches and they have condos.
Okay.
So just and while
Because it's
what
wayfinding.
it says
It's
here,
wayfinding. It's not advertising, or it's a wayfinding in a way. We also have 1 sign is for a public library, and then we have 2 signs in this diagram that are for the buildings, for that house businesses, like the square. That leaves us with only 4 signs right now that are actually logos of companies that are saying, hey, we're here. That's the T-Mobile, that's the Citibank, the SunTrust, and the Silver Sands Beach, which is actually off of Crandon and all the way tucked back. So 3 of them on Crandon that are actually, so one of my things that I would like to see in this analysis is that if we did say, okay, let's allow signs for businesses to put their logos on it, we're going to go from 4 to what? Because if you're comparing against 32 signs and say, oh, it's only going to be 12 more signs, it sounds like a small percentage. But when we're comparing it to the ones that are actually for the businesses putting their logos on it, it go from 4 to 16 is a massive difference, and it would look different on Crandon. So that's one of the concerns I have, is that when you really take this apart, we're looking at the 4 company logo signs is what I'm comparing what this ordinance is trying to open up for.
You're right, and the difference between signs and commercial signs is a big difference. And the difference between monument signs, let's say at a property with the dimension of the square and a property with the dimension of Key Colony Place is a big difference. And the replication of signage along Crandon with all of those properties, if there are the existing number now, perhaps it's inoffensive. If every single property has a sign that's 6 feet high and 24 square feet in dimension, that's a big change.
Allison.
That's what I was going to say.
I think 4 feet high is what it is.
No, but it's not only just going 4 to 12, it's going to 12 in like 2 blocks.
So if the takeaway is we got to be careful and still revisit the decision of, let's say, exceptions to a blanket prohibition, I'm all in favor of it. And I think we should. I think we intended to do that in 2010. But I don't see a uniform monument signage regulation for commercial signage, and particularly, let's say, for branded signage, for the type of logo signage, as opposed, for example, to an identification of a center in an appropriate place.
Well, I'd like to have some comparable policies for places we aspire to be like. So I would like to see what the Greenwich, Connecticut's do, what the Newport Beaches do, what, I know Palm Beach has this issue and whatever is, and Boca. But on the streets that are kind of the appropriate Main Street and not the business district off close to the residential, because this has been done before, and those are the comps that we want to be seeing. There may be creative options that we haven't considered that would really address our needs.
We did do comps for communities that we esteemed and thought we were similar to at the Zork, and there were several takeaways. One was uniform signage. Another was non-branded, you know what I mean by branded signage? Non-branded signage, the absence of backlighting, building signage being uniform in size and style, and not a plethora of, Fuddruckers type of signage, and no monument signs, basically. So the question of no monument signs was really not controversial, I think, in our group, with the exception of 2 things: the grandfathering and what exceptions could and should there be, and where and how big and what would they look like.
Well, and I think it's important to try to have some sort of a global decision on it, especially for this district that we're really talking about. Because when Mario and I met, he was talking about, and I've actually seen it. It was only one time, but I saw someone literally could not find their way into the driveway of what he was looking for.
It was Gary.
It was Gary.
That was me, yes.
So if you're going one way or the other, if you're going to have uniform monument signs to help people find that right turn when they're coming down Crandon, or you're going to have signs on the building, but we just gave them a variance for a big sign on the building. To have another one right in front is really, that's a tremendous, and this was the discussion we had, that I really had a hard time with both of those. It's a lot of signage. And I think the idea of trying to one-off it each time, like, we're past that.
Yeah.
We need to really look at it and make a decision of what we want the landscape to look like.
And remember, bear in mind as we go into this conversation, our principle was to not have variances, which was a discussion point that was a little bit controversial, but to have a regulation that works and not and get it right, and not rely on variances or administrative variances, but to get it right. And I think that we didn't complete the job of getting this right.
It's time to complete it, and let's have Gary weigh in, please.
I'm going to tell you what I don't like and what I do like, okay? I don't like the notion of having 32 monument signs and saying we can't have any more. That's totally unfair. to the people that are here now and to the ones that will be here in the future. I also don't think it's fair to take 32 signs and say tear them down, because we're not allowing monument signs anymore. I also don't want to be in a position where we have to have a variance for everyone that wants to put up a monument sign. I think that's ridiculous. I think it's a waste of time. And I think it puts this council and future councils in a very precarious position, because it almost sort of smacks of favoritism. Who deserves a sign and who doesn't, as opposed to what's offensive and what isn't. I don't care about what other communities are doing. There's not a single community on this list or on anybody else's list that bears any resemblance at all to this community here. And I think that what we need to do is to come up with a policy going forward that will allow a monument sign of a specific size, a specific shape, a specific design, a specific lighting feature, a specific setback, maybe even a specific color, and anybody that wants to put one up that complies with all of those things will get to put one up, but only on Crandon Boulevard. I don't think we have any other choice. I really don't.
Of course we have a choice.
Well,
of course
we have,
a choice.
Frank,
we have a choice on everything.
We have 20, yeah, sure, we can tell everybody to tear their sign down. That's a choice.
That's what the ordinance says.
I understand that. But we've put ourselves and the community in a situation that, in my mind, is sort of untenable.
I don't think so.
Well, so are you prepared to say to everyone, take your signs down?
No, I'm saying I don't want to do that. I don't think there's any reason to take the Yacht Club or the Presbyterian Church or Ocean Club's signs down.
We don't even have a sign. The Yacht Club doesn't even have a sign.
Right. And as Brett went to the trouble of parsing what signs we're talking about, all but a handful are innocuous.
Okay, but since I was speaking and telling you what I think personally I do like and don't like, I think the best solution of all is to come up with a uniform policy that will allow people to know what they can do and what they can't do, and whoever wants one will get to put one up. But the policy that we come up with will be self-limiting in that it will have certain requirements that some people won't be able to meet, and therefore they can't do what they want. They can only do what we have said they can do. It'll also find us in a situation where we've got some of these 32 signs, in addition to the ones that don't comply now, that also don't comply. And I think we need to be prepared to say to those people, you got to change them. But to me, the most important thing of all, any decision we make is we've got to be consistent, we've got to be fair, and we've got to make sure everybody understands what they can do and what they can't do. And that, to me, would be our objective and what I'd like to see us do.
Please, and by the way, your last 3 points, completely agree. Not sure how we're going to get there, but I agree.
I think signage is an incredibly important topic that we need to address, because I think it defines our community, you know. And from what I hear, you know, this is only basically the second time that I've discussed signs since I've been on this council, and from what I hear, I think we are going to have to make a decision as to whether we want the monument signs or not, you know, and then go from there, you know. If what we have right now exists and we're just not enforcing, then we need to change it if we're not going to enforce it, because I don't think we should have laws that we don't enforce. Absolutely. So I think it's a policy thing that we need to, you know, really think strongly about. I think it's a very important topic because I think it defines our community. I think it, you know, I think when I go someplace and the signage is in a certain way, I think of that place in that way.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Frank.
A couple of points of perspective, and I'd encourage you to bear this in mind. And I agree, your last 3 points, only the last 3 points. I disagree with everything else, but the last 3 points I agree with. A couple things.
Well,
one
I disagree with what you just said.
Come on, kids. Let's
the code changed. The code changed for the commercial district at the same time that we were working on this ordinance, the effect of which is to bring the centers to the street. So one of the notions historically in having a monument sign is that when the buildings are set back, and this is suburbia 101. When the buildings are set back and you're driving at a high rate of speed in a car, monument signs help you discern what's remotely in, on the other side of the driveway. That condition is a dinosaur in Key Biscayne because of the way our code was changed. Although the existing buildings that are set back, the gallery and the square are the examples, they have monument signs. The other thing is, I would encourage us to bear in mind that whatever solution we come up with respect to monument signs does not belong on every property on Crandon Boulevard. It's just, think about it. That is not a tenable solution if we want to maintain an aesthetic quality in this community. And it doesn't matter how big or tall or the color. That is too many monument signs.
Okay. Thank you very much, Frank. We have Brett and then we have Katie.
No, I would like to meet with Mario. I also want to meet with the Chamber of Commerce on this as well. I think something that I want to talk to Mario about is what if we pass something that allowed signs on every property, whether it be one sign for every property, what would it be? What's the worst case scenario? Are we talking about 5 more signs, 30 more signs? What is it? And I think that, maybe when we talk, we'll be able to get that analysis and kind of understand what the implications are of a decision like this. And that what I would really like to know in order to make the decision.
Well, at least one.
Well, 2 points. One of my thoughts about if we were to consider a form of monument sign, many of our buildings have multiple businesses in one building. So would each business have the right to have a monument sign on Crandon? And that would be a significant amount of signs.
No. I think
secondly,
one per property.
Secondly, the fact that we actually have a code right now that we're not enforcing means I think that we as a council should come up with a timeline by which we think we can make a decision on this.
I totally agree.
So what is it?
But I think we need a couple of things. And Madam Clerk?
Yes.
Again, and I think Frank spoke to this very eloquently. This was so hotly and passionately debated by a resident who, dozens came in to weigh in, and it was, something that was covered. And I think the context for this council to see the policy of when they were creating this, this municipality, what the driving forces were and the goals, because 25 years later, we're reaping the benefits of those policies. Just for context, I think that's important. If we can find that, distribute it, and have a short clip for the meeting where we discuss this. And then, as a follow-up also, and this would include our director, I do think in the past we have looked to model communities and municipalities that we want to emulate because they do things well. And some are in the state, and I think you mentioned
Naples, Palm Beach, Boca, it may be, Savannah, but these kind of similar demographics and that do things really well, because this issue isn't coming up for the first time.
In studying other communities, you have to differentiate where we want to be relative to car culture with communities that function as car culture communities. That is a major difference.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point.
Pedestrian culture.
And you have to also think of the proximity of the centers on the street. Mm-hmm. And our new zoning code, and Key Colony Plaza being an example of the frontage.
And I remember, again, the Main Street concept comes back to me, and business district versus a main street and a walkable main street.
Yes.
So I think all of that, we need all that information so that we can process.
And last, the other element that I forgot to mention, this was part of the input at that council, was that it's a small town. And people, Gary brought this up the last time we spoke about this. People really tend to know who's here. But admittedly, not in all cases. And we want to help the businesses that, you know, in an appropriate way, again.
Of course. And we want some feedback. We want feedback, and we want to engage our chamber. But I'll tell you, what Luis said I thought was very, very powerful is when he goes to towns and communities where signage is a certain way, it really, it stays with him, and it makes a wonderful impact. And I thought that was very compelling. Thank you.
Make one more point, if I can.
You can try.
I can try. I think we are two separate kinds of communities within one community. We are a car community, if you look at Crandon Boulevard, and we always will be, because that's a main thoroughfare, and we have, what, 1 million people a year driving down that street? They don't live here. Most of the ones that drive down that street don't live here. They're not familiar with the community. They do want to shop here, go to restaurants, and go to the businesses that we have. And I think that we have to treat Crandon Boulevard very tastefully and respectfully, but in a totally different way than we treat any other part of this community. Because if you carve out Crandon, it'll never be anything but a car community. It's not going to be a pedestrian thoroughfare. All right, well, you can beg to differ, but the bottom line is we have 1 million cars a year driving down Crandon, and most of those cars aren't people that live here. The rest of the community has a completely different personality and a completely different nature, and should be completely treated completely differently than Crandon. And I think we have to kind of bear that in mind.
I agree with that.
But to say that ignores the practical reality that Crandon is the heart, it's the carotid artery of the community. You can't treat Crandon differently and not debase Key Biscayne. You just can't do that.
But you could treat others like Crandon and totally deface Key Biscayne, because we don't want monument signs, I think, anywhere else. Crandon is where our businesses are.
Right.
Businesses aren't anywhere else on the island.
Folks, that is our debate, and we have, I think, we need to come back with more information and more thought. And if we want to schedule it, Katie, I think she's right, a timeline. And we are in October.
I commend you in stopping the debate at that particular moment.
Me too, because I got the last word.
Because I think we were starting to get circular.
We were. Thank you.
Well
yes, it's
that was very good.
Thank you. We're getting along so well today.
October 24th is our next.
Except at the beginning.
November 14th.
Okay, October 24th or November 14th? What do you want?
November 14th.
Okay.
So that we have enough time
Shall
to
I bring it back as a discussion item?
Yes.
Okay.
Council meeting.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Oh,
I have
sorry.
a second. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.
So what did we decide to